In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
The multiverse is a tapestry of infinite realities, each with its own immutable laws. But what happens when a being who has shaped the destiny of trillions, a god who denies his own divinity, tears through the veil between dimensions? What happens when the master of mankind, architect of the Imperium, falls into a world where faith has genuine power and the dead refuse to stay buried? London, 1999. The city sprawled beneath a blanket of fog and neon, unaware that reality itself was about to fracture. It began with light, not the pale illumination of street lamps or the flickering glow of television screens behind curtained windows, but a column of impossible golden radiance that split the night sky like a spear thrust from heaven itself. It erupted above the Thames, a pillar of psychic fire so intense that every sleeping mind in the city jolted awake with a gasp, hearts hammering, skin slick with sudden sweat. The light screamed in frequencies beyond sound, a clarion call that resonated in the soul rather than the ear. Then it fell. The figure plummeted from the breach in reality, trailing streamers of golden flame that burned away the fog in an expanding sphere. He struck the north bank with force that shattered cobblestones and sent cracks spiderwebbing through the concrete embankment. The Thames itself recoiled, water surging backward in a momentary wave that left the riverbed exposed for 3 heartbeats before crashing back with a roar. In the crater, surrounded by smoldering stone, the Emperor of Mankind rose. He stood over 10 feet tall, clad in golden armor that seemed to drink in the city's light and reflect it back transformed, purer, more terrible. His face was ageless and ancient simultaneously, possessed of a beauty that mortal minds struggled to process without weeping. Dark hair fell past broad shoulders, and his eyes burned with intelligence that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, that had guided humanity from the age of stone to the age of stars. The Emperor took a breath, his first in this new reality, and tasted the air. Prometheum exhaust, human fear, the copper tang of spilled blood, and underneath it all, something that made his lip curl in recognition and disgust: the stench of the undead. His psychic senses unfurled like the petals of some vast, predatory flower, sweeping across London in an invisible wave. Millions of human minds blazed before his perception, tiny candles of consciousness, fragile and brief. But scattered among them were absences, voids where souls should burn but instead existed as hungering shadows. Vampires. Dozens of them lurking in the city's shadows, parasites feeding on humanity's blood. And one was different. The Emperor's gaze turned southeast, toward the Hellsing estate in the countryside beyond London's sprawl. There, a presence dwelt that was neither wholly dead nor truly alive, an ancient thing bound by chains of blood and command, a monster, leashed to serve those who should have destroyed it millennia ago. "Humanity," the Emperor said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made nearby windows crack, "has grown complacent in my absence." He stepped from the crater, golden boots meeting undamaged pavement as if the destruction ended precisely where he willed it. The city's emergency services would arrive soon. He could hear their sirens already converging on his location. But before he dealt with this world's authorities, before he began the inevitable process of assessment and judgment, he needed to understand what manner of reality he had fallen into. The Emperor reached out with his mind, sifting through the psychic impressions embedded in London's stones and steel. Centuries of human memory flowed past his consciousness. Wars and plagues, kings and commoners, the slow evolution of civilization. And woven through it all, the secret history that mortal minds were never meant to fully grasp, the shadow war between humanity and the creatures that preyed upon it. He saw the Hellsing family's long crusade, the Vatican's militant arm, Iscariot, wielding faith as a weapon with genuine efficacy that would have amused him had it not been so philosophically offensive. And something else, a group called Millennium, artificial vampires created through perverse science, preparing for some grand design. The Emperor's expression hardened. This universe was small, limited to a single planet's concerns, but the fundamental equation remained unchanged. Humanity besieged by supernatural predators, weakened by ignorance and superstition, desperately needing guidance from one who could lead them to supremacy. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. Police vehicles screeched to a halt at the cordon, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. The Emperor regarded them with the patience of a father watching children play at war. They shouted commands he had no intention of obeying, their firearms tracking his movements with admirable discipline but laughable futility. He could kill them all with a thought, could reach into their minds and snuff out consciousness like pinching candle flames. But they were human, and humanity, despite its infinite capacity for foolishness, was sacred to him. Instead, the Emperor simply walked forward. The bullets came as he knew they would. The officers' fingers tightened on triggers as some primal instinct overrode their training, and a wall of gunfire erupted across the embankment. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness, the reports echoing off nearby buildings. Every round stopped 3 inches from the Emperor's armor, frozen in midair by invisible force. They hung suspended in a cloud of copper-jacketed lead, dozens of bullets caught in a telekinetic grip as casual as breathing. He gestured, and the bullets dropped harmlessly to the ground with a musical clatter. "I am not your enemy," the Emperor said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the dying echoes of gunfire. "But neither am I your supplicant. Contact your government. Tell them that one who has walked among humanity since its dawn has arrived to audit what you have become." He could feel their terror, their awe, the way their minds bent like grass before a storm, trying to comprehend what stood before them. Good. Fear was the beginning of understanding, and understanding was the first step toward accepting what must be done. The Emperor turned his gaze skyward, toward the stars he could no longer reach, toward an Imperium that existed in another reality entirely. He was cut off, separated from the great work that had consumed his existence for longer than this civilization had drawn breath. But perhaps that was acceptable, perhaps even necessary. In the Imperium, he had been forced into the role of God Emperor, worshipped by the very masses he had sought to illuminate with reason. Here, in this small and ignorant world, he could begin again, could show humanity what it meant to cast off the shackles of supernatural tyranny without the compromises and failures that had plagued his previous efforts. And if he discovered a way to return to his own reality, well, then he would bring the lessons learned here back to an Imperium that desperately needed them. But first, he needed to deal with the most pressing heresy, an organization that employed a vampire as its weapon against other vampires. The sheer philosophical offense of such pragmatism over principle made his jaw tighten. The Hellsing organization would receive his judgment soon enough. The Emperor began walking through London's streets, leaving the stunned police behind. His psychic presence rolled before him like an invisible wave, and everywhere it touched, the supernatural recoiled. A lesser vampire feeding in an alley burst into golden flame mid-bite, reduced to ash before it could scream. A ghoul shambling through a cemetery collapsed into dust as his attention swept past. He was the anathema, the antithesis of all that was unnatural and corrupt. And in this world of shadows and blood, he had arrived to bring the final dawn. The Hellsing estate sprawled across acres of carefully manicured grounds 30 miles southeast of London, its Victorian architecture a monument to old money and older secrets. Within the mansion's subterranean levels, in chambers designed to contain things that should not exist, Alucard felt the disturbance ripple through reality like a shockwave through still water. He sat in his preferred chair, a throne-like piece of furniture that had witnessed centuries pass, reading a worn copy of Bram Stoker's novel with the sardonic amusement only the genuine article could muster. The book fell from his hands as every supernatural instinct he possessed screamed a warning his conscious mind struggled to process. Something had arrived. Something that burned. Alucard rose in a fluid motion, his crimson coat swirling around him like congealing blood. His shadow stretched and writhed across the stone floor, dozens of eyes opening within its depths, the gazes of souls he had consumed over centuries of feeding. They all turned in the same direction, toward London, toward a presence that radiated power so intense it registered as physical pain to his undead senses. "Master," he said, his voice carrying through the mansion's intercom system with preternatural clarity, "we have a problem." In her office, 3 floors above, Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing set down her pen and reached for her glasses with hands that did not tremble. She had inherited control of England's greatest supernatural defense at 13 years old, had commanded the most powerful vampire in existence since she was barely more than a child, and had learned long ago that the words, "we have a problem" from Alucard meant something truly exceptional had occurred. "Report?" she said crisply, already reaching for the encrypted phone that connected directly to the roundtable conference. "Something has entered London," Alucard said, and there was an unfamiliar edge to his voice. Not fear precisely, but recognition of threat. Not vampire, not human, not anything I have encountered in 4 centuries of unlife. It burns, Master. Burns like the sun concentrated into human shape. Integra's mind raced through possibilities, discarding each as quickly as it formed. Iscariot. Anderson's regeneration is holy fire given form. This is older, more primal. It feels like... Alucard paused, searching for words to describe the indescribable. Like standing before the concept of humanity weaponized. My shadows recoil from it. The lesser vampires in the city are dying, Master. I can feel them winking out like candles in a hurricane. She pulled up the police reports already flooding into Hellsing's intelligence network. Witnesses describing a pillar of golden light. A figure in armor emerging from a crater by the Thames. Bullets stopping in midair. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner was already screaming for answers she did not have. "Arm yourself," Integra commanded. "We leave in 10 minutes. Walter, prepare the vehicle and full combat loadout." "Already done, Sir Integra." Walter C. Dornez's cultured voice came through the intercom. The aging butler who served as Hellsing's retainer and weapons specialist had anticipated the order before she gave it. Though I feel compelled to note that if Alucard is concerned, perhaps a more cautious approach would accomplish nothing, Integra finished. If this entity is hostile and powerful enough to trouble our pet vampire, caution is simply a slower path to the same confrontation. We meet it on our terms, with our strength clear. She stood, adjusting her suit jacket and checking the magazine in her Walther PPK out of habit more than necessity. Against something that made Alucard uneasy, a pistol would be approximately as useful as harsh language. But Sir Integra Hellsing did not meet threats unarmed, regardless of their nature. The Emperor walked through London's streets with the unhurried pace of one to whom time had long since lost its urgency. Crowds parted before him instinctively, their subconscious minds recognizing something their conscious thoughts could not articulate. Some stared. Others looked away, unable to bear the weight of his presence. A few dropped to their knees in spontaneous genuflection, moved by instincts buried in humanity's evolutionary memory. He paid them little mind, his attention focused on the psychic architecture of this world. It was fascinating in its limitations. A single planet, no warp travel, no communication across the stars. Humanity confined to one sphere, ignorant of its potential, preyed upon by supernatural parasites that should have been exterminated millennia ago. And yet, there was something here, a resilience. Despite the vampires and ghouls that hunted in the shadows, despite the ignorance and superstition, humanity endured, thrived even. Perhaps there was hope for this iteration of his species. The Emperor's contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of the Hellsing vehicle, an armored transport that rumbled to a halt 30 feet from his position. The civilians who had been following at a respectful distance scattered, recognizing the organization's insignia and wanting no part of what was about to occur. The door opened, and Sir Integra stepped out. She was young, perhaps 30, with short blonde hair and steel-rimmed glasses that did nothing to soften the cold authority in her blue eyes. She wore a man's suit like armor, her posture radiating command that had been bred into the Hellsing bloodline over generations of supernatural warfare. A cigarillo burned between her fingers, the smoke curling up into the night air. The Emperor studied her with interest. Here was nobility, genuine aristocracy of purpose rather than mere lineage. A woman who had inherited duty and embraced it without flinching, admirable in its way. "I am Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing," she announced, her voice carrying clearly despite the urban noise around them. "You have entered England without authorization, caused significant property damage, and according to our instruments, are causing the spontaneous death of every lesser vampire within a mile of your position. Explain yourself." Straightforward, direct. The Emperor approved. "I am called many names," he replied, his voice resonating with harmonics that made Integra's hand tighten on her pistol reflexively. "In the reality from which I come, I am the Emperor of mankind, architect of the Imperium, unifier of humanity across 1,000,000 worlds. In this reality, I am simply one who has arrived to assess whether your species is worth preserving." The words hung in the air, like a pronounced sentence. "That sounds remarkably like a threat," Integra said evenly. Though the Emperor could feel her pulse quickening, adrenaline flooding her system as fight-or-flight instincts warred with iron discipline. "It is an observation," the Emperor corrected. "I have walked among humanity for more than 40,000 years. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched humanity reach for the stars and fall into darkness, guided your species through its most critical junctures. Tell me, Sir Integra Hellsing, why does your organization employ a vampire as its weapon? Why does humanity here treat with monsters rather than exterminate them?" Integra's jaw tightened. "Because pragmatism trumps idealism. Alucard serves the Hellsing family absolutely. He has protected England from supernatural threats for over a century. I will not apologize for using every tool at my disposal to defend my nation, even when that tool is an abomination against nature itself." The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter. "Even when you chain a predator and pretend it is domesticated, your pragmatism is the compromise that will doom your civilization, given time. And your idealism," Integra shot back, "sounds like the ravings of a fanatic. I deal with reality, not philosophy." Before the Emperor could respond, the shadows around them began to writhe and coalesce. Alucard materialized from the darkness between streetlights, his form pulling itself together from pure shadow. He stood behind Integra, a tall figure in crimson, with eyes like blood moons and a smile that promised violence. The Emperor turned his full attention to the vampire, and Alucard's smile faltered. They regarded each other across 10 feet of London pavement, the master of mankind and the no-life king, immortal and undead, human pinnacle and supernatural parasite. The air between them seemed to crystallize, reality straining under the weight of their opposing natures. "You," Alucard said slowly, his voice dropping an octave into something that resonated with ancient hunger, "are the most interesting thing I have encountered in 400 years. And you," the Emperor replied, "are an obscenity that should have been destroyed the moment you first died." Alucard's grin widened, showing too many teeth. "Master, I like this one. May I kill him?" "No," Integra said firmly, though the Emperor could sense her calculating odds, weighing options, running through scenarios in her tactical mind. "Not yet. First, we determine if he's an enemy or simply incredibly rude." The Emperor almost smiled at that. Almost. "I am neither your enemy nor your ally, Sir Integra. I am a force of nature, and I have arrived in your world at a curious moment. My psychic senses detect preparations for war, artificial vampires gathering in numbers that suggest invasion rather than infiltration. Tell me, are you aware that something called Millennium is preparing to assault your nation?" Integra's expression flickered, just for a moment, with surprise before returning to its mask of control. "Our intelligence suggested movement, but within 3 weeks," the Emperor continued, "they will deploy approximately 1,000 vampire soldiers in a coordinated assault on London itself. Their goal is not conquest, but chaos. War is an end unto itself." He tilted his head slightly, which raises an interesting question. What will you do when your pet vampire is insufficient to stem such a tide? "I will do," Integra said coldly, "what the Hellsing family has always done. Whatever is necessary to protect England." The Emperor nodded slowly. Here was the crux of it, the fundamental question that would determine his course of action in this world. Could humanity here be salvaged, elevated to supremacy over the supernatural? Or had they compromised too deeply with the very monsters they should destroy? Sir Integra Hellsing, with her pragmatic employment of a vampire weapon and her unflinching acceptance of duty, represented everything the Emperor both admired and despised about humanity's survival instinct. He would give her a chance to prove which impulse deserved to win. "Then we shall see, Sir Integra, if your necessities align with the greater good of your species. I will observe your preparations. I will watch how you conduct this coming war. And when it is finished..." The Emperor's eyes blazed with golden fire. "I will render judgment on whether humanity in this reality deserves to continue under its current leadership." "I don't recall," Integra said icily, "requesting your approval." "You did not," the Emperor agreed. "But you have it nonetheless. Consider it a gift from one who has guided your species since before your ancestors learned to forge bronze." He turned and began walking away, his departure as absolute as his arrival. "Master," Alucard murmured, his eyes tracking the Emperor's retreating form with the focus of a predator watching prey it cannot quite classify. "What is he?" "Trouble," Integra replied, lighting a fresh cigarillo with hands that trembled only slightly. "The kind that makes our usual problems look refreshingly simple. The Major sat in his command center aboard the Graf Zeppelin the Sketu. a dreadnought of an airship that defied modern aviation through sheer Nazi engineering audacity and the liberal application of vampire-powered systems. Banks of monitors displayed intelligence feeds from across England, each screen a window into the final preparations for Operation Seabrise, the glorious invasion that would baptize London in blood and fire. He was a small man, unremarkable save for the manic gleam in his eyes and the smile that never quite reached them. His fingers steepled before his face as he watched footage captured by Millennium's surveillance network. A pillar of golden light, a figure in armor, and the spontaneous immolation of 3 of their lesser operatives who had been foolish enough to remain in London proper. "Magnificent," the Major whispered, his voice carrying the reverent tone of a man witnessing art. "Doctor, are you seeing this?" The doctor hunched over his instruments, his grotesque form made more unsettling by the childlike excitement in his voice. "Ja, Herr Major. The energy readings are unprecedented. This entity he registers as human baseline, yet the psychic output exceeds anything in our database. He is not vampire, not werewolf, not any categorized supernatural." "He is something new," the Major interrupted, his smile widening. "Something that makes our little war infinitely more interesting. Tell me, Doctor, what happened to our agents when they came within proximity of this Emperor?" "Spontaneous cellular combustion," the doctor reported gleefully. "Not fire, precisely, but an expression of energy that treats undeath as an error to be corrected. Our freak chips simply stopped functioning. The subjects reverted to human corpses and disintegrated within seconds." The Major leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant with calculation and delight. "A being whose very existence is anathema to vampirism. How wonderfully inconvenient for the Hellsing organization. They cannot use their pet monster against him without risking Alucard's destruction. Shall we adjust our timetable?" the doctor asked. "If this entity opposes supernatural beings, he may interfere." "No." The Major's voice cut through the question like a blade. "We accelerate nothing. We delay nothing. War must be conducted with artistic precision, and art cannot be rushed or altered for the convenience of new players on the stage. If this Emperor wishes to participate in our opera, then he shall have a role. Everyone has a role in war, Doctor. Everyone." He gestured to one of his subordinates. "Lieutenant Zoran, what is your assessment?" Zoran Blitz lounged against the far wall, her tattooed face twisted in a sneer. "He's powerful, ja. But power alone means nothing. I've ripped through the minds of the powerful before, turned their thoughts against them. Let me take First Lieutenant Rip Van Winkle's aerial unit and a dozen of our best. We'll test this Emperor, see, if his mind is as protected as his flesh." "No," the Major said again, more firmly. "You will do no such thing. This being radiates psychic energy that makes our instruments scream. Your illusion techniques would be like throwing tissue paper at a bonfire. You would die, and while I find death beautiful, I prefer it occur according to my orchestration, not premature improvisation." Zoran's scowl deepened, but she held her tongue. The Major's word was absolute within Millennium. "We observe," the Major continued, rising from his chair to approach the largest monitor. The Emperor's image filled the screen. Golden armor, burning eyes, a presence that the camera struggled to capture without distortion. We watch how he interacts with Hellsing, with Iscariot, with the world that has no context for his existence. And when Operation Seabrise begins, when our 1,000 warriors descend upon London like a plague of iron crosses and fangs, then we shall see how this Emperor responds to the most beautiful chaos humanity has ever orchestrated. What if he opposes us? The doctor ventured. Then he opposes us. the Major said with a shrug. And we learn if his philosophy can withstand 1,000 artificial vampires tearing through the civilization he claims to protect. What is ideology against the purity of violence? What are his 40,000 years of experience against the simple, perfect truth of war? He turned to face his command staff, his smile now radiant with anticipation. Gentlemen, we have been gifted an audience member who may actually understand our performance. The Hellsing bitch sees war as duty. Iscariot sees it as holy crusade. But this emperor, he has waged campaigns across galaxies, commanded armies that eclipse nations. He knows war as we know it, not as means to an end, but as the ultimate expression of human will. You think he'll join us? One of his officers asked skeptically. Join us? No. But appreciate us? The Major's eyes gleamed. Perhaps. At the very least, he will bear witness. And is that not what every artist craves? An audience capable of understanding the masterpiece? The Hellsing Estate's war room had been activated for the first time in months. Maps of London covered the walls, marked with known Millennium positions and suspected infiltration points. Intelligence reports piled on the central table, each one painting a grimmer picture of the forces arrayed against England. Sir Integra stood at the head of the table. Walter to her right, Seras Victoria, Alucard's fledgling vampire, to her left. The young police officer turned undead stood at attention, her massive Harkonnen cannon resting against her shoulder, blue eyes wide with barely controlled anxiety. The Emperor's intelligence was accurate, Walter confirmed, his aged fingers sorting through reconnaissance data. Millennium's forces have increased activity along the coast. Submarine deployments, aerial reconnaissance, encrypted communications, suggesting coordination for a major operation. Timeline matches his prediction, 2 to 3 weeks before assault. How could he possibly know that? Seras asked, her voice still carrying traces of her former humanity's confusion. He only just arrived. He hasn't accessed our networks or psychic precognition, Integra said flatly. He reads the future like we read yesterday's newspaper, or he extrapolated from psychic impressions, or any of a dozen abilities we have no context for understanding. She drew on her cigarillo, exhaling smoke in a thin stream. The method matters less than the accuracy. If he's correct about Millennium's numbers and timeline, we need to adjust our defensive strategy. 1,000 vampire soldiers, Walter said quietly. Even artificial vampires represent a significant threat. Our forces are stretched thin as it is. Alucard can destroy dozens, perhaps hundreds, but even he cannot be everywhere at once. Which is why the Emperor's interference is both blessing and curse, Integra replied. His presence destroys lesser vampires autonomously. Simply standing in London, he creates a dead zone that could devastate Millennium's ground forces. But he also represents an uncontrolled variable, Walter finished. We don't know his goals, his methods, or whether he considers us allies or simply temporary conveniences. Integra nodded grimly. I've contacted the Roundtable Conference. They're analyzing what little footage we have. The Prime Minister wants answers I cannot provide. The Vatican has likely detected the disturbance as well. Iscariot will be mobilizing if they haven't already. Master, Alucard's voice echoed through the room despite his physical absence. He remained in his chambers, recovering from the unsettling encounter. I have been considering our golden visitor. He radiates power, yes, but more than that. He radiates certainty. The absolute conviction of one who has never encountered a problem he could not solve through force of will. Your point? Integra asked. Such certainty makes one predictable. He sees vampires as abominations to be destroyed. He sees supernatural threats as obstacles to human supremacy. If Millennium attacks London with 1,000 vampire soldiers, the Emperor will respond. Not because he allies with us, but because he cannot allow such creatures to run rampant through a human city. So we use him, Integra said slowly. Not as a weapon we control, but as a natural disaster we can direct. Like calling down lightning to strike your enemies, Walter mused. Dangerous, but effective, if properly managed. Seras shifted uncomfortably. Sir Integra, is it wise to treat someone that powerful as a tool? What if he considers it manipulation and turns against us? Then we deal with that when it occurs, Integra replied. But right now, Millennium poses the immediate existential threat. The Emperor's judgment of humanity can wait until after we've ensured there's a humanity left to judge. She stubbed out her cigarillo and straightened. Walter, contact our intelligence assets. I want continuous surveillance on the Emperor's movements. Seras, begin preparing defensive positions throughout London. Coordinate with the Metropolitan Police and Armed Forces. Alucard. Yes, Master. The vampire's voice dripped with anticipation. Stay away from the Emperor unless absolutely necessary. I will not have our greatest weapon destroyed because you couldn't resist testing yourself against something that burns on death like kindling. A low chuckle echoed through the room. You know me too well, Master. But I make no promises. 4 centuries of unlife have been tediously boring. This Emperor is the first thing I've encountered that might actually be capable of killing me permanently. The temptation is considerable. Integra's jaw tightened. Control yourself, or I will command you to remain in your chambers for the duration. Am I understood? Silence. Then, understood, Master. But Integra knew her servant well enough to hear the lie in his acquiescence. The Emperor stood atop the Tower of London, the ancient fortress that had witnessed a millennium of England's history. The Thames flowed dark beneath him, London's lights spreading in all directions like a galaxy viewed from above. It was a small galaxy, limited and finite, but it held potential. He had spent the night walking among humanity, listening to their thoughts, tasting their fears and hopes. They were ignorant, yes, but not irredeemable. They had built this civilization without guidance, had survived despite the predators that hunted them. There was strength here, resilience that reminded him of humanity's earliest days when survival itself was an act of defiance against a hostile universe. But they had made compromises, employed monsters as weapons, accepted supernatural threats as manageable rather than eradicable. The Hellsing organization's very existence represented everything wrong with pragmatism, unconstrained by principle. And yet, the Emperor's psychic senses detected the approach before physical manifestation occurred. Space twisted, reality bent, and a figure materialized from the shadows at the tower's base, not through any door or window, but simply appearing as if he had always been there and was only now choosing to be noticed. Alexander Anderson stood in his black cassock, his blonde hair falling past stern features, arms crossed over a chest that concealed regenerative abilities that bordered on immortality. Blessed bayonets lined his sleeves, each one capable of piercing vampire flesh and burning unholy essence. Behind his round glasses, green eyes assessed the Emperor with the focus of a warrior priest who had sent thousands of monsters to their final judgment. I am Father Alexander Anderson, he announced, his Scottish brogue thick with righteous fervor. Paladin of the Vatican, executioner of the unclean, and servant of the Almighty God. And you, whatever you are, radiate power that makes every holy relic in my possession scream warnings. The Emperor turned to face him fully. Here was something different from Integra's cold pragmatism. A true believer, one whose faith had been tested in blood and steel until it became unbreakable. I am no vampire, the Emperor said. No demon. No threat to your God's faithful, provided they do not interfere with my purpose. And what purpose would that be? Anderson descended from his crouch, bayonet sliding into his hands with practiced ease. You arrive in a pillar of light. You destroy the undead with your mere presence. You speak of judgment upon humanity itself. Forgive me if I find that concerning. Your concern is noted and dismissed, the Emperor replied. I have no conflict with the Catholic Church, Father Anderson, despite our philosophical differences regarding the nature of divinity. Anderson's eyes narrowed. Explain. You believe your power comes from God. I know it comes from your own will, channeled through symbols and rituals that focus human psychic potential. What you call faith, I call self-actualized determination. What you worship as divine, I understand as evolutionary advantage. The temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. Anderson's grip on his bayonets tightened until his knuckles went white. Heresy, he breathed. Blasphemy of the highest order. Truth, the Emperor corrected. I have lived since before your church existed. I have seen religions rise and fall like tides. Your faith is powerful, Anderson, more powerful than you know. But not because of external divinity, because of the strength within you that you attribute to something else. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Anderson threw back his head and laughed. A sound like breaking glass, beautiful and terrible. You're either the devil himself or the maddest thing I've ever encountered, he said. Either way, the Vatican will want words with you. Archbishop Maxwell is convening a conference regarding the coming storm. Millennium's heretics plan something blasphemous, and Hellsing's pet vampire will be insufficient to stop it. I am aware, the Emperor said. I have foreseen the assault. 1,000 artificial vampires descending on London like locusts, the Major orchestrating chaos for its own sake. Then you'll help us? Anderson asked, suspicion warring with hope in his voice. I will help humanity, the Emperor replied. Whether that aligns with the Vatican's goals remains to be seen. I have no love for organizations that employ monsters, but I have even less tolerance for Nazi resurrections who pervert science to create abominations. Anderson nodded slowly. The enemy of my enemy, then. For now. For now, the Emperor agreed. The priest began to fade back into shadow, his departure as supernatural as his arrival. But he paused, half-manifested, and looked back. One more thing, Anderson said. You claim to have lived 40,000 years. You speak of guiding humanity. Tell me, in all that time, in all those millennia of watching my species crawl from caves to cities, did you never once feel the touch of something greater? Never sense the hand of God moving through history? The Emperor's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his golden eyes. A memory, perhaps, or a moment of doubt from an age before certainty had calcified into absolute conviction. I have felt many things, Father Anderson, but I learned long ago that attributing mystery to divinity is humanity's greatest weakness. What you cannot explain, you worship. What you worship, you cannot control. And what you cannot control will eventually destroy you. Or save you, Anderson replied. We'll see which proves true when Millennium comes. Amen. He vanished completely, leaving the Emperor alone atop the tower once more. The pieces were moving into position. Hellsing, seeking to use him as an unwitting weapon. Millennium, viewing him as a fascinating addition to their opera of violence. Iscariot, uncertain whether he represented salvation or damnation. And he stood at the center of it all, a being without context in this universe, carrying the weight of 40 millennia and the memory of an Imperium that spanned the stars. The coming war would test more than military might. It would test philosophies, faiths, and the fundamental question of what humanity should become when faced with supernatural threats. The Emperor smiled grimly. He had waged the Great Crusade across a galaxy. A single city would suffice for now. Below, London slept, unaware that its fate had become a proving ground for forces it could not comprehend. The Emperor walked London's streets as dawn broke over the city. Golden light spilling across the Thames in a way that seemed almost reverential to his presence. Humans rushed past on their morning commutes, their minds humming with mundane concerns, bills, relationships, careers, the thousand small anxieties that defined mortal existence. They parted around him instinctively, their subconscious minds registering something their conscious thoughts could not process. He had spent the night in contemplation and reconnaissance, his psychic senses mapping the city's supernatural geography with methodical precision. Lesser vampires had fled or been destroyed. Ghouls had retreated to their masters' lairs. The shadow war that had raged for centuries beneath London's surface had been temporarily disrupted by his mere presence. But his attention now focused on something specific. A psychic signature approaching from the southeast, accompanied by the distinctive energy pattern of blessed, silver, and consecrated steel. The Vatican's forces were mobilizing, and they were not subtle about it. A convoy of black vehicles rolled through the early morning traffic with the authority of those who answered to powers beyond national governments. They bore no markings, but the Emperor's enhanced senses detected the holy wards woven into their armor plating, the blessed ammunition stored in their weapons lockers, the prayers etched into every surface. The vehicles stopped in a semicircle around him, doors opening in synchronized precision. 20 regenerators emerged, Vatican assassins who had been granted Alexander Anderson's gift of resurrection, holy warriors who could survive wounds that would kill ordinary men. They wore black suits and carried crosses openly, their eyes hidden behind sunglasses that failed to conceal the fanatic devotion burning within. And from the central vehicle stepped Archbishop Enrico Maxwell. He was young for his position, perhaps in his mid-30s, with platinum blonde hair styled immaculately and features that might have been beautiful were they not twisted by ambition and religious fervor. He wore white robes that marked him as Vatican elite, and he carried himself with the arrogance of one who believed himself God's chosen instrument. "Behold," Maxwell announced, his Italian accent lending his English a theatrical quality, "the anomaly that has set London ablaze with rumor and fear. Tell me, stranger, do you kneel before God's representative on earth?" The Emperor regarded him with the patience of stone regarding the wind. "I kneel before no one, Archbishop Maxwell. I am humanity's shepherd, not its supplicant." Maxwell's smile was cold. "Heresy, then. How refreshing to have it stated so plainly. The Vatican has observed your arrival with great interest. A being of immense power, antagonistic to the undead, appearing precisely as the forces of darkness gather for assault. Some in the Holy See believe you are an angel sent to aid us in the coming tribulation." "And you?" the Emperor asked. "I believe you are a tool," Maxwell replied bluntly. "Whether forged by God or devil matters less than your utility. Millennium prepares to unleash an army of vampire abominations upon this Protestant nation. Hellsing's resources are insufficient. Iscariot's forces, while righteous, are limited in number. But you," his eyes gleamed behind his glasses, "you destroy vampires simply by existing near them. Imagine what you could accomplish if properly directed." "Directed," the Emperor repeated, his voice dropping to a register that made the regenerators shift uncomfortably. You speak as if I am a weapon to be aimed, Archbishop. I assure you, I am not. Everyone is a weapon, Maxwell countered, stepping closer with the confidence of one protected by 20 holy warriors. The question is merely who wields them. Join Iscariot. Lend your power to God's righteous crusade. When Millennium's heretics descend upon London, we will meet them with holy fire and your unique abilities. Together, we will cleanse this land of Protestant compromise and vampire filth alike. The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter, and Maxwell took an involuntary step backward. You speak of cleansing, the Emperor said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made windows rattle in nearby buildings. But your motivations are political, not practical. You see Millennium's assault as an opportunity to embarrass Hellsing, to discredit Protestant England, to expand Vatican influence. You would use humanity's suffering as a stage for sectarian theater. Maxwell's face flushed. How dare? I dare because I have watched your species since before Rome was founded, the Emperor interrupted. I have seen countless religions rise, each claiming exclusive divine mandate, each willing to sacrifice human lives on the altar of ideological purity. Your church is no different. You dress your ambition in holy vestments, but it remains ambition nonetheless. One of the regenerators stepped forward, bayonet sliding from his sleeves. You will not speak to His Excellency with such... The man stopped mid-sentence, his eyes going wide. The Emperor had not moved, had not raised a hand, but the regenerator suddenly found himself unable to complete the thought. His mind pressed against an invisible wall, his will subsumed beneath psychic pressure that threatened to snuff out his consciousness like a candle flame. Stand down, the Emperor commanded, and the regenerator's arms dropped to his sides despite his best efforts to resist. I will tolerate no violence born of wounded pride. He released his psychic grip, and the man staggered backward, gasping. Maxwell's expression had shifted from arrogance to calculation. You are psychic, a powerful one. Interesting. The Church has dealt with psychics before. Witches, heretics, those who dabble in powers beyond human ken. They all burned eventually. Your Church burned scientists, philosophers, and healers, the Emperor replied. Those who threatened its monopoly on truth. I am beyond your capacity to threaten, Archbishop. But I am not your enemy, provided you do not make me one. Then what do you propose? Maxwell asked, regaining some of his composure. You reject Hellsing's pragmatism. You reject the Church's authority. What path do you walk? My own, the Emperor said simply. When Millennium attacks, I will defend humanity. Not because Hellsing commands it, not because the Vatican ordains it, but because that is my purpose. I will destroy the vampire soldiers not as your weapon or Integra's tool, but as the anathema, the force that has opposed supernatural corruption since your ancestors lived in caves. Maxwell studied him for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You are either magnificently arrogant or something genuinely transcendent. I confess myself uncertain which. Very well, walk your own path. But know that Iscariot will be watching. And if your actions threaten the Church's interests, you will do nothing, the Emperor stated. Your regenerators are formidable against vampires and mortal opponents. Against me, they are less than insects. Your blessed weapons would shatter against my will. Your prayers would die unheard. I say this not to threaten, but to establish reality. We can coexist, Archbishop Maxwell, but only if you accept that I am not subject to your authority. The Archbishop's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. For now, we have common cause. Millennium's abominations must be destroyed. If you fight them, Iscariot will not interfere. Beyond that, he shrugged. We shall see what God wills. He turned to leave, then paused. One question, if I may. You claim to have guided humanity for 40,000 years. Yet humanity has suffered endlessly, wars, plagues, atrocities beyond counting. If you are our shepherd, why have we bled so profusely? The Emperor's expression darkened. Because I learned, Archbishop, that shepherding requires allowing the flock to make its own mistakes. Every time I imposed my will absolutely, humanity rebelled. Every time I revealed myself openly, I was worshipped as a god, precisely what I sought to prevent. So I walked among you hidden, nudging rather than commanding, hoping you would evolve past your need for external guidance. And has it worked? Maxwell asked. I am still trying to determine that, the Emperor admitted. This universe presents an interesting test case. Humanity here has no knowledge of my existence, no Imperium to venerate me against my will. Perhaps here I can finally implement the imperial truth without it being corrupted into the very theocracy I sought to prevent. Maxwell laughed, a genuine sound, sharp and humorless. You seek to destroy religion while radiating power that makes men want to worship you. The irony is exquisite. Very well, Emperor. We shall see whose truth prevails when the blood flows. The Vatican. Convoy departed, leaving the Emperor alone once more. His psychic senses detected other observers. Hellsing surveillance teams positioned throughout the city. Millennium scouts operating from concealed positions. Ordinary humans recording footage on their mobile phones that would spread across this primitive information network. The Emperor was beginning to understand the nature of this world's conflict. It was not merely supernatural versus human, but competing philosophies of survival. Hellsing's pragmatic compromise, Iscariot's religious absolutism, Millennium's nihilistic worship of violence as art. All of them were wrong, each in their own way. But he would not impose his will by force. Not yet. He would observe, judge, and when Millennium's 1,000 vampires descended upon London, he would demonstrate what humanity could accomplish when guided by one who had transcended their limitations without abandoning their essence. The sun rose higher, and London went about its business, unaware that 3 great powers now circled like predators, preparing for a feast. Hellsing fortified its positions. Iscariot mobilized its holy warriors. Millennium counted down to glorious chaos, and the Emperor stood at the center, a force of nature awaiting the storm. His thoughts turned to the Imperium. He had left behind, or perhaps ahead, depending on how one measured dimensional displacement. 10,000 years into that reality's future, he sat upon the golden throne, a corpse god sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers daily, worshipped by trillions as the god emperor despite his lifetime of opposing such veneration. Here, he stood free, unbound, capable of implementing his vision without the weight of 10 millennia of accumulated dogma and theological calcification. Perhaps this displacement was not accident, but opportunity. The Emperor's lips curved in something that might have been a smile. The Chaos Gods had sought to destroy him by casting him into another dimension. Instead, they had given him a laboratory, a world where he could test his philosophy without the compromises and failures that had plagued the Imperium. And if he succeeded here, if he could guide this small world's humanity to supremacy over the supernatural without becoming their god, then perhaps there was still hope for the Imperium. A psychic pulse rippled through his awareness. Alucard, prowling the shadows of London despite Integra's orders, drawn toward the Emperor like a moth to flame. The vampire's curiosity was becoming dangerous. He wanted to test himself, to discover if the Emperor could truly destroy him permanently. The desire for ultimate death. How very human in its way. The Emperor turned and began walking toward the vampire's position. If Alucard sought confrontation, better to have it now, before Millennium's assault complicated matters. Better to establish dominance clearly. So the no-life king understood the hierarchy. Besides, the Emperor found himself curious as well. Alucard had consumed millions of souls over centuries of feeding. He was not merely undead, but a gestalt entity, a collective consciousness wearing the skin of Dracula. How would such a being interact with the anathema? Would the souls burn individually? Or would the Emperor need to unravel the entire psychic architecture that held them together? Only one way to discover the answer. The Emperor's pace quickened, his golden armor reflecting the morning sun in blinding flashes. Across the city, Alucard's grin widened with anticipation. Two immortals, drawn together by the gravity of their opposing natures. The collision would illuminate much about the rules of this new reality. They met in an abandoned warehouse district along the Thames, a stretch of industrial decay that London had forgotten but never quite demolished. Rusted shipping containers stood like monuments to commerce past, and the skeletal remains of cranes stretched toward a sky heavy with clouds. The location had chosen itself, far enough from civilian populations that collateral damage would be minimal, isolated enough that surveillance would be difficult. Alucard stood in the center of the largest warehouse, his crimson coat pooling around his feet like congealed blood. His arms hung loosely at his sides, but the Emperor could sense the coiled readiness in his posture, the predatory focus of something that had hunted and killed for 4 centuries. Behind his orange-tinted glasses, eyes like blood moons tracked the Emperor's approach. "You came," Alucard said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I wondered if you would ignore my invitation." "Your presence was hardly subtle," the Emperor replied, entering through the warehouse's main entrance. The doorway seemed to shrink around him, reality struggling to accommodate his scale. "You have been following me since our first meeting, vampire. Integra commanded you to keep distance, yet here you are." Alucard's grin widened, showing too many teeth, far more than any human mouth should contain. "My master commands, and I obey, usually. But she also understands that I am a monster kept on a leash, not a tame dog. Sometimes the leash slips." "You seek death," the Emperor observed, his psychic senses reading the layers of desire and madness that comprised Alucard's consciousness. Not mere destruction, but true annihilation. "You have existed for so long that oblivion has become attractive. You wonder if I am capable of granting it." The vampire's expression flickered, surprise, then something approaching respect. "Most see only the monster, the killing machine, the weapon Hellsing aims at its enemies. But you see, deeper. Yes, I want to die. Have wanted it for longer than I care to remember. But not just any death. A death that matters. A death earned against an opponent who doesn't simply match me, but transcends me." "I am not here to grant your wish," the Emperor said flatly. "Your existence offends me, vampire. You are an undead parasite, sustained by consuming human souls. Every moment you continue to exist is an abomination against the natural order. But you serve a purpose. You protect humanity from worse monsters. That gives you value, however distasteful I find it." "How pragmatic," Alucard said mockingly. "And here, I thought you were an idealist, the great Emperor who despises compromise, willing to tolerate a vampire because he's useful. What would your imperial truth say about that?" The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter, and the temperature in the warehouse dropped. Frost began forming on the metal surfaces, spreading outward from where he stood. Do not mistake tactical patience for compromise, creature. When Millennium is destroyed, when this world's immediate supernatural threats are neutralized, you and I will have a reckoning. Until then, you serve at Integra's command, and I will not waste resources eliminating a tool that has utility. Resources, Alucard repeated, tasting the word. You speak as if destroying me would cost you anything. Prove it. Show me what you are, Emperor. Show me if that golden fire of yours can burn away 400 years of accumulated damnation. Without warning, Alucard's shadows exploded outward. The darkness that comprised his essence erupted like a tsunami of liquid night, filling the warehouse from floor to ceiling. Within the shadows, eyes opened, thousands upon thousands of them, each belonging to a soul the vampire had consumed. They stared with the vacant gaze of the devoured, their consciousness subsumed into Alucard's gestalt being. Hands emerged from the darkness, grasping, reaching, pulling at reality itself. The Giya, Emperor, stood unmoved as the shadow wave crashed against him. Where the darkness touched his presence, it burned. Golden fire erupted along the boundary between his aura and Alucard's shadows, the anathema nature of his being reacting to undeath like an immune system attacking infection. The souls within the shadows screamed, not in pain, but in sudden recognition. They saw something they had not seen since their consumption: hope of release. Alucard snarled, pulling his shadows back before more souls could be annihilated. Interesting. You don't just kill vampires, you unmake them. Strip away the stolen life force, burn the souls free from their binding. I am the antithesis of your existence, the Emperor confirmed. My presence alone weakens you. Sustained contact would unravel the psychic architecture that holds your stolen souls together. You would not simply die. You would cease, and all those you consumed would be released to whatever afterlife this universe provides. Then why haven't you done it? Alucard demanded, his form coalescing back into human shape. Why stand there explaining when you could simply end me? Because, the Emperor said, and something in his tone suggested genuine consideration. You are more than the sum of your atrocities. You were human once. Vlad Tepes, Prince of Wallachia, defender of Christendom against Ottoman invasion. You fought for humanity before you became its predator. That memory, however buried beneath centuries of vampirism, deserves acknowledgement. Alucard stared at him, the perpetual grin finally fading. You speak of Vlad Tepes as if he still exists. He died 5 centuries ago. I am what remains, the monster he became when he rejected God and embraced damnation. Nothing is ever truly gone, the Emperor replied. Consciousness persists. The core of what you were remains, however deeply buried. You bound yourself to the Hellsing family, seeking redemption through service. You hunt monsters hoping to find one capable of granting you the death you cannot give yourself. These are not the actions of a simple predator. These are the desperate struggles of a soul seeking purpose beyond predation. For a long moment, silence filled the warehouse. Then Alucard threw back his head and laughed. A sound like breaking glass and tearing steel, beautiful and terrible. You're insane, he said, but without the mockery of before. Absolutely, magnificently insane. You stand before a creature that has slaughtered thousands, consumed millions of souls, and you speak of redemption. What are you, really? God? Devil? Something that transcends both? I am human, the Emperor said simply. The first and finest example of what humanity can become when it refuses to accept limitations. I have lived 40,000 years not through supernatural corruption, but through perfection of biology and will. I am what your species should aspire to. Power without compromise, immortality without vampirism, supremacy, without selling your soul. Then why do you burn with power that feels divine? Alucard pressed. Why do blessed weapons and holy symbols pale before your presence? Why does my undead essence recoil from you the way it recoils from Anderson's faith? The Emperor's expression hardened. Because faith is psychic power given form. Your reaction to blessed weapons is not divine judgment, but your own psyche responding to focused human will. Anderson believes with such intensity that his conviction manifests as tangible force. I do not believe. I know. I am human, will perfected and weaponized across 40 millennia of existence. You recoil from me because I am what you can never be. Truly, completely, transcendently human. Alucard absorbed this, his eyes distant. If what you say is true, if faith and divine power are simply human will in religious costume, then everything I've experienced, everything I've believed about my damnation, is self-imposed, the Emperor finished. You believe you are damned, so you act as the damned. You believe you are a monster, so you embrace monstrosity. But belief can be changed, vampire. Will can be redirected. Even one as far fallen as you could potentially. No. Alucard's voice cracked like a whip. Don't offer me hope. Don't suggest redemption. I've waded through oceans of blood. I've torn children from their mothers and drained entire villages dry. Whatever I was as Vlad Tepes died when I chose damnation over death. This isn't self-imposed suffering. This is justice. I am the monster, and monsters deserve only destruction. Then why do you hesitate? The Emperor asked. Why not simply walk into sunlight? Remove your coat, your hat. Stand beneath the noon sun and let it burn you to ash. Why bind yourself to Hellsing if you truly believe you deserve only destruction? Alucard's hands clenched into fists. Because I'm a coward. Because despite everything, some pathetic part of me still hopes for meaning beyond. Slaughter. So I serve. I hunt other monsters. I pretend that somehow, eventually, this service will balance the scales. Foolish, isn't it? No, the Emperor said, and his tone carried unexpected gentleness. It is the most human thing about you. The vampire's head snapped up, meeting the Emperor's burning gaze. You want to know what separates you from true monsters? The Emperor continued. True monsters feel no guilt, seek no redemption, hope for no meaning beyond their appetites. The fact that you torture yourself, that you seek death while simultaneously grasping for purpose, these are human traits, vampire. Corrupted and twisted by undeath, yes, but fundamentally human nonetheless. What are you suggesting? Alucard asked warily. I am suggesting, the Emperor said, that when Millennium's assault comes, you and I will fight on the same side. Not because I approve of your existence, but because you represent a question I find genuinely interesting. Can something as corrupted as a vampire be reclaimed for humanity? Can the undead be redeemed? And if the answer is no, then after Millennium is destroyed, I will unmake you personally. I will burn away the stolen souls, dissolve the psychic bindings that hold you together, and grant you the true death you claim to desire. But I will do it knowing I gave you one final chance to prove that even monsters can choose humanity. Alucard stood very still, processing this. Then slowly, deliberately, he straightened his hat and adjusted his coat. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual mockery. You're either the cruelest being I've ever encountered, or the kindest. I genuinely cannot determine which. Very well, Emperor. I will fight your war. I will destroy Millennium's artificial vampires and protect the humans you claim to shepherd. And when it's done, if you still find me wanting, I will grant you oblivion, the Emperor confirmed. "But it will be an earned death, vampire. A meaningful end. That much, at least, I can promise." The warehouse fell silent, save for the distant sound of the Thames lapping against the embankment. Two immortals who should have been enemies had instead forged something that transcended alliance. A compact born of mutual recognition that both walked paths no others could understand. "My master will be furious that I disobeyed her orders," Alucard said finally, a hint of his usual grin returning. "She commanded me to avoid you." "Then we shall not inform her of this meeting," the Emperor replied. "Let Sir Integra believe her commands are being followed. Tactical deception serves our purposes better than open defiance." "Lying to my master," Alucard mused. "You continue to surprise me, Emperor. I thought you dealt only in absolute truth." "I deal in necessary truth," the Emperor corrected. "There is a difference. Integra need not know we have reached an understanding. Let her continue to view me as an uncontrolled variable, and you as her obedient weapon. When Millennium attacks, reality will correct her misconceptions." Alucard nodded slowly. 3 weeks. That's how long until the Major's opera begins. What will you do until then? "Continue my assessment," the Emperor said. "This world is small but complex. I wish to understand its factions, its power structures, its potential for evolution, and I will prepare for the cleansing that must come. 1,000 artificial vampires represent a significant supernatural force. Even I cannot destroy them all instantaneously." "But you can destroy many," Alucard observed. "Your presence alone creates a dead zone for lesser vampires. The Major's freak soldiers are artificially created, weak compared to true vampires. They'll burn like paper in your fire." "Perhaps," the Emperor agreed. "But the Major is not a fool. He knows I exist. He knows my capabilities. He will have planned for my interference. This invasion is not merely military conquest. It is theater, performance art waged through violence. The Major will ensure I have a role, whether I choose to accept it or not." "You speak as if you understand him," Alucard said. "I understand all variants of madness," the Emperor replied. "In 40,000 years, I have encountered every permutation of human pathology. The Major is a nihilist who has found meaning in meaninglessness, purpose in purposelessness. He wages war not to win, but to experience the perfection of violence itself. Such men are dangerous precisely because they cannot be reasoned with or threatened. They have transcended fear and hope alike. Then how do you stop them?" The Emperor's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "You give them what they want, war in its purest form, and then demonstrate that their philosophy is insufficient. You match their violence and exceed it. You prove that meaning exists even in chaos, that purpose transcends nihilism. You break their aesthetic by showing them something more beautiful than destruction." "And what could be more beautiful than war?" Alucard asked. The Emperor's smile was cold and terrible. "Victory. 16 days remained until Millennium's projected assault." The Emperor had established himself in an unexpected location. Not the Tower of London with its historical weight, not Buckingham Palace with its political symbolism, but atop the Shard, London's tallest building. The observation deck had been quietly cleared by authorities who could not articulate why they felt compelled to obey. Only that refusal seemed impossible when faced with his request. From this vantage point, he could observe the entire city spread below like a living organism. His psychic senses extended across London's sprawl, monitoring the movements of factions preparing for war. Hellsing fortified defensive positions. Iscariot positioned its regenerators at strategic points. And somewhere across the channel, Millennium's fleet waited for the Major's command. But the Emperor's attention focused inward as much as outward. He had spent the past week analyzing this universe's fundamental structure, and his findings disturbed him in ways he had not anticipated. This reality's metaphysical architecture was simultaneously simpler and more problematic than the Imperium's. There was no warp here, no Imperium teeming with demonic entities born from mortal emotion. The supernatural threats were localized, individual, manageable on a tactical level. But the very absence of the warp created a philosophical paradox that challenged the imperial truth at its foundation. In his universe, faith had power because it fed the chaos gods. Dangerous, yes, but explicable through psychic mechanics. Here, faith had power for no mechanistic reason he could identify. Anderson's blessed bayonets worked not because of psychic feedback loops, but because something in this universe's structure acknowledged the concept of holiness as objective reality. It was as if this universe had been designed by a theist. The Emperor found this deeply offensive. "Troubled thoughts for one who claims certainty," a voice said. From behind him, the Emperor did not turn. He had sensed the approach, a psychic signature that registered as human, but moved through space in ways that violated conventional physics. Warrant Officer Schrödinger materialized from quantum superposition, the catboy who existed in all states simultaneously until observed. He wore the uniform of Millennium's forces, his hands tucked into his pockets, his expression one of cheerful curiosity. The Emperor's anathema nature should have burned him instantly. He was, after all, a vampire of sorts. But Schrödinger existed in a state that precluded such simple categorization. "Herr Major sends his regards," Schrödinger said, sitting cross-legged in midair as if gravity were optional. "He has been observing you with great interest. He wanted me to deliver a message." "Speak," the Emperor commanded, finally turning to face the boy. "The Major wishes you to know that he has prepared a role for you in Operation Seabrise. He understands you, will interfere. In fact, he counts on it. A war without worthy opponents is merely massacre, and massacre lacks aesthetic merit. You are to be the wild card, the element of chaos within his carefully orchestrated symphony. Your Major mistakes me for a participant in his theater," the Emperor said. "I am not performing for his amusement." Schrödinger's smile widened. "Yeah, but that is what makes you perfect for the role. The unwilling actor who believes himself the director. Herr Mayer finds such dramatic irony exquisite. You will fight to protect humanity, and in doing so, you will elevate his war beyond mere military engagement into genuine art." "Art," the Emperor repeated, his voice dropping dangerously. "Your Major weaponizes philosophy and calls it creativity. He dresses nihilism in aesthetic language and pretends it represents meaning. But all his carefully orchestrated violence amounts to nothing, sound and fury, signifying exactly what he claims. Nothing at all." "You misunderstand, Herr Mayer," Schrödinger said, his tone becoming more serious despite his youthful appearance. "He does not claim war is meaningless because nothing matters. He claims war is the only thing that matters because it is the purest expression of human will. In battle, all pretense falls away. Politics, religion, philosophy, all reduced to the fundamental question, who survives? A reductionist position born from trauma and sustained by cowardice," the Emperor replied. "Your Major experienced war's horror, and rather than transcending it, he fetishized it. He made his inability to find meaning beyond violence into a virtue." Schrödinger tilted his head, considering this. "Perhaps. But is your position so different? You have waged war for 40,000 years. You built an empire through conquest. You crusade against supernatural threats with the same fervor Herr Mayer brings to his opera. Are you not also defined by violence? I wage war as a means to an end, the Emperor said. To create a civilization where war is no longer necessary. Your major wages war as an end unto itself. We are not the same. Are you certain? Schrödinger asked. 40,000 years of war, and still humanity requires your shepherding. Still monsters threaten your flock. Still you take up arms again and again. Perhaps you and Herr Major are more similar than you wish to admit. Both eternally bound to violence, both unable to exist without conflict to define you. The Emperor's eyes blazed, and for a moment Schrödinger's quantum state flickered, threatened by psychic pressure that sought to collapse his superposition into a single, vulnerable reality. But the boy stabilized, grinning impishly. You cannot kill me so easily, Herr Emperor. I exist everywhere and nowhere. To observe me is to define me, but I remain undefined until that observation. I am Schrödinger's cat-made flesh, simultaneously dead and alive until you open the box. Quantum manipulation, the Emperor observed, his anger cooling into clinical interest. Your consciousness exists in superposition across multiple probability states. Fascinating. Your major's scientists achieved something remarkable, even if they did so in service of monstrosity. Herr Doctor is very proud, Schrödinger agreed. But I did not come merely to deliver messages. I came to ask you a question. Ask. When you destroy Millennium's forces, and you will, we know this, what will you do with the survivors? Herr Major expects to die gloriously in his perfect war. But what of the soldiers who simply followed orders? The scientists who created weapons because they were commanded to? Will you punish the tools for how they were used? The Emperor considered this. Those who chose to serve Millennium's nihilistic vision bear responsibility for that choice. But those who were conscripted, coerced, or deceived, judgment must be proportionate to culpability. How disappointingly rational, Schrödinger said. I hoped you would be more absolute. Purity is so much more dramatic than nuance. Purity is the refuge of simple minds, the Emperor replied. I am many things, but simple is not among them. Now deliver your major's message and depart. I have preparations to complete. Schrödinger saluted mockingly. Herr Mayer says, I look forward to seeing what you truly are when the blood flows. Will you be the shepherd protecting his flock? The tyrant imposing his will? The warrior who finds meaning through victory? Or something else entirely? Something even you do not yet recognize. Those are his words, not mine. Tell your major, the Emperor said, that I will be exactly what this situation requires. Humanity's judgment upon those who would prey on it. And when his 1,000 vampires are ash, he will understand that philosophy, no matter how artfully expressed, cannot withstand absolute force. We shall see, Schrödinger replied. And then he simply wasn't. Not teleportation or shadow walking, but quantum decoherence, ceasing to exist in this location because he chose to exist elsewhere instead. The Emperor's psychic senses detected no trail, no residue, nothing that could be tracked. Millennium's capabilities were more sophisticated than he had initially assessed. The Major was not merely a madman with an army. He was a strategist who understood that modern warfare required innovation as much as firepower. The Emperor returned his attention to London below, but his thoughts churned with uncomfortable questions. Was Schrödinger correct? After 40 millennia of warfare, had he become so defined by conflict that peace was no longer achievable? The Imperium he had built was perpetually at war, against chaos, against Xenos, against internal heresy. 10,000 years after his internment on the Golden Throne, humanity still fought for survival rather than flourishing. Had he failed? Not tactically. The Imperium endured, vast beyond comprehension. But philosophically, the imperial truth had been corrupted into the imperial cult. His attempt to free humanity from religious superstition had resulted in his own deification. Everything he had built became a mockery of his intentions. Perhaps that was why the Chaos Gods had sent him here. Not to destroy him, but to torment him with the possibility of success in a smaller, more manageable reality. A universe where he could potentially implement his vision without the compromises that had doomed the Imperium. Or perhaps this was simply another test, another crucible through which he would emerge either validated or broken. The Emperor's contemplation was interrupted by the sensation of multiple psychic presences approaching. Not hostile, precisely, but wary. He recognized them immediately. Integra, Walter, and Sarah's Victoria approaching in an armored vehicle that crawled through London traffic below. They wished to speak with him, to coordinate perhaps, or to extract promises of alliance that he would not give. Either way, the conversation would be illuminating. He waited as they ascended the shard through conventional means, his patience infinite. When the elevator doors opened and Integra stepped out onto the observation deck, she did so with her characteristic composure, though the Emperor sensed the tension in her posture. "Emperor," she said, foregoing pleasantries, "we need to discuss what happens when Millennium attacks." "Do we?" the Emperor replied mildly. "Yes." Integra lit a cigarillo, the flame briefly illuminating her face in the fading daylight. "You've been questioned by the Round Table Conference. The Prime Minister wants assurances that you won't destabilize the nation. The military wants to know if you'll coordinate with their defensive plans. And She paused, choosing words carefully. "I need to understand if you're going to help or simply make everything more complicated." "I will destroy Millennium's vampire forces," the Emperor said, simply. "Beyond that, I make no promises." "Not good enough," Integra replied sharply. "London has 8 million civilians. When 1,000 vampire soldiers attack, evacuation is impossible. Containment is our only option. That requires coordination between Hellsing, the military, Iscariot, and yes, you. Will you work within a command structure, or will you operate as a lone agent?" "I am not a soldier in your army," the Emperor said. "I will not take orders from you or your government. But neither will I ignore tactical realities. If coordinating with your forces increases human survival rates, I will do so. If operating independently proves more effective, I will do that instead. My priority is humanity's protection, not your chain of command." Walter stepped forward, his aged voice carrying quiet authority. "Sir Integra, perhaps we could establish a communication link? If the Emperor provides updates on his movements and intentions, we could coordinate without imposing formal command structure." The Emperor considered this. "Acceptable. Provide me with a communication device compatible with your systems. I will relay information that serves tactical purposes, but I will not justify my decisions or submit plans for approval." "Arrogant," Integra muttered. But she nodded to Walter, who produced a military-grade radio transceiver from his case. "This operates on encrypted frequencies," Walter explained, handing it to the Emperor. "It will allow direct communication with Hellsing Command and, if necessary, military coordination centers." The Emperor examined the device with mild interest. Primitive by the Imperium standards, but functional. He attached it to his armor with a thought, psychic manipulation, integrating it into his systems. 16 days, he said. Your intelligence confirms this timeline? Satellite reconnaissance detected unusual activity in Millennium staging areas. Walter confirmed. Naval movements suggest imminent deployment. We estimate 14 to 18 days before assault begins. 16, the Emperor repeated with certainty. The Major has a sense of theater. He will choose a symbolically significant date. Saturday, January 19th, the anniversary of something relevant to his ideology. Integra's eyes narrowed. How can you possibly? Precognition, the Emperor replied. I perceive probability streams and identify the most likely outcomes. The Major is predictable in his unpredictability. He will choose timing that maximizes dramatic impact. January 19th satisfies his aesthetic requirements. Sarah's Victoria, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice carried the uncertain quality of one still adjusting to undeath. Your Majesty, Emperor, will you really destroy all the Millennium vampires? Even though some of them might have been forced into it? The Emperor turned his full attention to her, and she flinched slightly under his gaze. You question my methods before I have employed them, he observed. Why? Because... Saras hesitated, glancing at Integra for support before continuing. Because I'm a vampire too. I didn't choose this. I was dying, and Master Alucard turned me to save my life. If you destroy vampires just for existing, does that include me? The question hung in the air like a pronounced sentence. Tell me, Saras Victoria, the Emperor said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. Do you feed on human blood? Medical blood bags, she replied quickly. I've never killed anyone to feed. Sir Integra provides. Do you control your hunger, or does it control you? I control it, mostly. Sometimes it's hard, but I don't give in. And if given the choice between remaining vampire or becoming human again, which would you choose? Saras blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Human. Absolutely human. I never wanted this. I didn't want to die. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then you are not my enemy, Saras. Victoria. You are a human cursed with vampirism, fighting to retain your humanity despite supernatural corruption. That struggle has merit. When I destroy Millennium's vampires, I will be eliminating those who have embraced their predatory nature, who revel in their superiority over humans. You, who despise what you have become and fight to control it. You represent hope, not corruption. Tears, blood tears, formed in Saras's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Integra's expression softened fractionally. Your Majesty, Do not thank me for basic moral discernment, the Emperor interrupted. Saras Victoria is not a monster. She is a victim struggling against her condition. There is a difference, and I am not so absolute that I cannot recognize it. He turned back to face London, the setting sun painting the city in shades of gold that matched his armor. 16 days, he repeated. Prepare your forces, Sir Integra. Coordinate with Iscariot if you must, though I suspect Archbishop Maxwell will prove more hindrance than help. Ensure civilian evacuation routes are established for zones that become untenable. And accept that when Millennium's assault begins, chaos will reign regardless of planning. War is entropy given form. All we can do is channel it toward acceptable outcomes. You sound like you're looking forward to it, Integra observed. I am not, the Emperor said quietly. I have fought enough wars to last 1,000,000 lifetimes. Each one is a failure, proof that reason and diplomacy were insufficient. But if war is inevitable, Better to wage it with overwhelming force and end it decisively than to allow it to metastasize into prolonged conflict. He glanced back at them, his eyes blazing in the gathering darkness. When Millennium's vampires descend on London, I will show them what humanity is truly capable of when guided by one who has perfected its potential. The Major wants theater. I will give him tragedy, the kind where the villain realizes too late that he was never the protagonist of his own story. Integra smiled coldly. I think I'm beginning to understand why Alucard finds you so fascinating. Do not mistake understanding for approval, Sir Integra. Your vampire serves you well, but he remains an abomination. When this war ends, that reckoning will come. Then I suppose we'll deal with that when the time comes, Integra replied. For now, we have a common enemy. That will have to be enough. The Emperor did not respond, returning his attention to the city below. 16 days until the Major's opera began. 16 days to prepare for the cleansing. 16 days until he proved whether his philosophy could withstand its greatest test, defending humanity without becoming the tyrant they would worship. The sun set completely, and London's lights blazed to life like stars brought low to earth. War was coming, and the Emperor of mankind stood ready to remind this small universe what it meant to face the anathema. Saturday, January 19th, 1999, 10:47 p.m. The Millennium Armada appeared over the English Channel like a vision from Hell's own archives. A fleet of aircraft that should not exist, sustained by technology that violated known physics and powered by the unholy fusion of Nazi engineering and vampiric essence. At its center, the Graf Zeppelin the Sketur dominated the sky, a dirigible the size of a naval destroyer, bristling with weapons and trailing dozens of smaller craft like a queen bee surrounded by drones. Aboard the flagship, the Major stood before his command screens, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes gleaming with the fervor of a conductor before the symphony's first note. Around him, Millennium's officers maintained their stations with the disciplined precision of true believers preparing for religious ecstasy. Gentlemen, the Major said, his voice carrying clearly despite the engine's roar. The hour has arrived. Operation Seabrise, the glorious wind from the east, begins now. 1,000 vampire soldiers stand ready to descend upon London. Decades of preparation culminate in this moment. History itself holds its breath. He turned to face them, and his smile was radiant. Some will call this terrorism. Others will name it warfare. But we who understand the purity of violence, the poetry of destruction, we know this for what it truly is. Art. We are not invading England. We are painting a masterpiece in blood and fire, and the canvas is London itself. The officers responded with crisp salutes, their faces reflecting the same manic devotion that burned in their commander. Begin the assault, the Major commanded. And remember, this is not about conquest. This is about the experience of war itself. Let them see what true dedication looks like. Let the Emperor of mankind witness what happens when philosophy meets fire. Let this night burn so brightly that even God turns away in shame or awe. The deployment began. From the underbelly of the Graf Zeppelin and its accompanying vessels, what rockets launched in cascading volleys, not the crude weapons of World War II, but modern iterations enhanced with precision guidance and explosive payloads designed specifically to shatter London's infrastructure. They scream toward the city like falling stars. Their engine roars a mechanical hymn to destruction. And behind the rockets, the vampires deployed. 1,000 freak soldiers dropped from altitude in specialized containers, their artificial vampirism allowing them to survive impacts that would pulverize normal humans. They wore the field gray uniforms of Wehrmacht soldiers, each one armed with modern assault rifles modified to fire blessed silver ammunition. Millennium's twisted joke on the weapons traditionally used against vampires. They fell on London like a plague of iron crosses. The Emperor felt the assault begin before the first rocket struck. His psychic senses registered the death toll. Climbing, civilians caught in the initial bombardment, emergency responders rushing toward danger, soldiers mobilizing to defensive positions. The city's panic washed over him in waves, millions of minds suddenly confronting mortality. He stood atop the shard still, having maintained his vigil through the preceding 2 weeks. Now he rose to his full height, golden armor blazing as he channeled power that had been held in reserve. "It begins," he said into the communication device Walter had provided. Millennium's forces are deploying across 7 primary zones. I am detecting approximately 1,000 vampire signatures, with concentrations heaviest in Westminster, Camden, and the City of London. Civilian casualties are already mounting. Integra's voice crackled through the speaker, tense but controlled. "Acknowledged. Hellsing forces are mobilizing. Alucard is being deployed to Westminster. That's where Millennium's command structure appears strongest. Can you—" "I will begin. Neutralization immediately," the Emperor interrupted. "But understand, I cannot be everywhere simultaneously. My effectiveness is limited by geography, not capability. Prioritize civilian evacuation. I will create dead zones where vampire forces concentrate, but human military must handle perimeter containment." "Understood," Integra replied. "The RAF is scrambling interceptors to engage Millennium's air support. British Army is establishing defensive cordons. God help us all." The Emperor terminated communication and stepped off the shard's observation deck. He did not fall so much as descend with purpose, psychic energy cushioning his drop as he plummeted 300 meters to the street below. The impact cratered pavement, sending shockwaves through surrounding buildings. Car alarms triggered in cascading waves. Windows shattered. But the Emperor was already moving, his enhanced speed carrying him toward the nearest concentration of vampire forces. Westminster burned. The historic heart of British government had become a war zone in minutes. V-1 rockets had torn through Big Ben's tower, leaving it listing at a dangerous angle. Parliament itself blazed from multiple impacts. The Thames reflected orange firelight, turning the river into a stream of molten copper. And through the smoke and flame, Millennium's vampires prowled like hunting packs unleashed. They were not the elegant predators of Gothic fiction. These were soldiers, disciplined, coordinated, efficient. They moved in squad-level formations, covering each other's advances, communicating through radio headsets. When they encountered civilians, they did not drain them slowly for pleasure. They killed with mechanical precision, then moved to the next target. War as assembly line, death as logistics problem. The Major's aesthetic made manifest. The Emperor entered Westminster like a meteor strike. His presence detonated across the psychic plane, a shockwave of pure anathema energy that every vampire in a quarter-mile radius felt like a knife to the brain. They turned as one, artificial instincts screaming danger even as their training demanded they assess the threat. What they saw defied comprehension. A figure in golden armor, burning with light that hurt to perceive, striding through fire and debris with the inevitability of an avalanche. Where his gaze fell, reality seemed to sharpen, colors intensifying, shadows retreating, the very air growing heavier with presence. The vampires opened fire. Blessed silver ammunition, rounds that had been specifically prepared to harm supernatural entities, poured toward the Emperor in a wall of automatic fire. Dozens of assault rifles discharged simultaneously, their muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Every round stopped 3 feet from his armor. The Emperor gestured, and the telekinetically suspended bullets reversed trajectory. They accelerated back toward their sources at twice their original velocity, punching through vampire skulls with devastating precision. 20 freak soldiers collapsed simultaneously, their enhanced regeneration inadequate to repair catastrophic brain damage. But regeneration was irrelevant when the Emperor's attention focused on them. Golden fire erupted from the corpses. Not conventional flame, but the anathema nature of his being made manifest. It burned not flesh, but the supernatural essence that animated undead tissue. The freak chips embedded in their bodies sparked and melted. The vampiric corruption that sustained them dissolved like mist before the sun. Within seconds, 20 vampires became 20 human corpses. Their brief unlife terminated absolutely. The surviving freak soldiers fell back, their training warring with supernatural terror. Their radios crackled with commands from superior officers, ordering them to regroup, to coordinate, to focus fire on weak points. But the Emperor had no weak points. He advanced through their defensive positions like a force of nature. When they concentrated fire, he reflected it. When they attempted flanking maneuvers, his precognition anticipated every movement. When they called for heavy weapon support, rocket launchers, grenades, improvised explosives, he detonated them telekinetically before they could be deployed. And always, his presence burned them. The freak soldiers began to understand, in the final moments before annihilation, what it meant to face something that existed specifically to destroy their kind. This was not a battle. This was extermination. They were insects before flame, shadows before the sun, corruption before purity weaponized. The Emperor showed no mercy because mercy implied they had the capacity for redemption. These were not Saras Victoria, victims struggling against their condition. These were willing participants in Millennium's ideology, soldiers who had chosen to become monsters in service of nihilistic violence. They had made their choice. He would honor it by granting them oblivion. Westminster's vampire concentration was neutralized within 10 minutes. 73 freak soldiers reduced to corpses. 14 more fled toward other zones, their morale shattered. The Emperor let them go. They would spread panic among their fellows, degrading Millennium's coordination. But even as he achieved this tactical victory, his psychic senses detected the broader situation deteriorating. Camden, Iscariot's forces had engaged Millennium, but were being overwhelmed by numbers. Alexander Anderson fought like a saint possessed, his blessed bayonets carving through vampires with holy fury. But even his regeneration had limits. Archbishop Maxwell coordinated from the rear, his tactical acumen hampered by arrogance and overconfidence. The city of London, Saras Victoria, led a Hellsing rapid response team, her Harkonnen cannon demolishing vampires with explosive rounds. But she was retreating toward defensible positions as freak numbers proved too great for her fledgling abilities to counter. And somewhere in the chaos, Alucard hunted. The no-life king had been released with Integra's full authority, his power unchained for the first time since the Emperor's arrival. The vampire moved through London like a red shadow. His twin pistols, the Casal and the Jackal, thundering as he destroyed Millennium soldiers with surgical precision. But Alucard was playing with his prey. The Emperor could sense it, the vampire's enjoyment of the hunt, his pleasure in testing himself against coordinated opposition. He was not fighting efficiently. He was savoring the experience. Unacceptable. The Emperor's mind reached out across the distance, psychic communication piercing through Alucard's consciousness like a spear. Vampire, you waste time with theatrics while humans die. Fight properly, or I will come to your location and finish what you started. Alucard's mental response carried surprise, then dark amusement. "Ah, Emperor, I was wondering when you would notice. Very well, no more playing. Let me show you what I'm truly capable of when the leash comes off." The vampire's presence suddenly intensified across the psychic plane. The shadows of London seemed to deepen, spreading like ink through water. And from those shadows, Alucard released his true form. The Emperor felt it, millions of souls screaming in unison as Alucard's consciousness expanded to encompass them all. The vampire was no longer a single entity, but a gestalt, a horde wearing human skin. His shadows erupted across 3 city blocks, drowning Millennium soldiers in an ocean of darkness populated by the eyes and hands of the devoured. It was horrific. It was effective. And it was exactly what this situation required. The Emperor nodded in grim approval and turned his attention to the next crisis point. The Graf Zeppelin II hung above London like a floating fortress, its weapons batteries raining destruction on defensive positions. British military interceptors engaged Millennium's escort fighters, the night sky torn by tracer fire and missile contrails. But the flagship itself remained untouchable, protected by altitude and anti-aircraft systems. The Emperor's eyes blazed as he calculated trajectories and probabilities. Then he began to rise. Psychic energy manifested as visible force, lifting him from Westminster's burning streets. He ascended like a reverse meteor, golden light trailing behind him as he accelerated toward the dirigible. Anti-aircraft fire tracked his approach, automated systems identifying him as an aerial threat, and unleashed torrents of high-explosive shells. The Emperor tore through the barrage like it was rain. Shells exploded against his psychic shields, their force dissipating harmlessly. He adjusted trajectory mid-flight, his precognition allowing him to navigate the optimal path through overlapping fields of fire. Within 30 seconds, he had covered 2 miles of vertical distance. The Graf Zeppelin II's hull loomed before him, a vast surface of armored fabric and metal plating, bristling with weapons emplacements and decorated with massive iron crosses that seemed to mock the very concept of sanctity. The Emperor extended his hand toward the dirigible superstructure, and he unmated. Telekinetic force, refined by 40,000 years of practice, focused on molecular bonds. The metal began to scream as its atomic structure was forcibly rearranged. Rivets popped like gunshots. Armor plating buckled and tore. Support beams twisted into abstract sculptures of tortured steel. Inside the Graf Zeppelin, alarms shrieked as structural integrity collapsed. The Major watched his command screens display catastrophic system failures across every section. He did not panic. He did not rage. He simply smiled wider, his eyes gleaming with the ecstasy of one witnessing exactly what he had hoped to see. "Magnificent," he whispered. "The Emperor comes for us personally. We have earned his full attention. What greater honor could warriors ask for?" "Herr Major," the doctor shouted over the chaos. "We must evacuate. The ship is our stage," the Major interrupted calmly. "And every stage must have its finale. Sound the evacuation order for the crew, but we remain. I wish to meet our golden guest face to face." The Emperor tore through the dirigible's hull like parchment. He entered the command center in an explosion of metal and fire, his arrival so violent that 3 officers were killed instantly by shrapnel. The survivors scrambled for weapons, but the Major raised his hand, commanding them to stand down. "Emperor of mankind," the Major said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind howling through the breached hull. "Welcome aboard the Graf Zeppelin II. I am honored that you chose to visit personally rather than simply destroying us from afar." The Emperor's gaze swept the command center, assessing threats and calculating optimal termination, vectors. But his attention settled on the Major, this small, unremarkable man who radiated such profound conviction that it bordered on a psychotic break. Your invasion fails, Major. I have destroyed 300 of your soldiers in the past 15 minutes. Alucard eliminates dozens more as we speak. Iscariot's forces rally. British military establishes containment. Your grand opera concludes in defeat. Does it? The Major asked, genuinely curious. How do you define defeat, Emperor? If my goal was conquest, yes, we have failed. But if my goal was the experience of war itself, the pure, beautiful chaos of violence unchained, then we have succeeded beyond my wildest projections. You stand before me now, having torn through my flagship like an avenging angel. What could be more perfect? The Emperor's expression hardened. You worship entropy. You mistake destruction for meaning. You are a cancer celebrating its own malignancy. And you, the Major replied, are a tyrant who mistakes control for purpose. You claim to shepherd humanity, but you offer them only the choice between submission and irrelevance. At least I am honest about what I am, a monster who loves war for its own sake. What are you, truly, beneath the golden armor and philosophical pretensions? The Emperor raised his hand, psychic energy coalescing into destructive potential that could atomize the Major and everyone present. But he paused. Not from mercy, not from doubt, but from recognition that the Major's question deserved an answer, not for the Major's benefit, but for his own clarity. I am, the Emperor said slowly, what humanity requires me to be. Shepherd when guidance is needed. Warrior when threats emerge. Tyrant when chaos must be suppressed. I have been all these things across 40,000 years because humanity's survival demanded it. And when this night ends, when your corpse is ash and your ideology forgotten, humanity will continue. That is the only metric that matters. The Major's smile never wavered. Then kill me, Emperor. Grant me the glorious death I have orchestrated this entire invasion to earn. Let my final moment be at the hands of the greatest warrior humanity has ever produced. What more beautiful conclusion could my opera have? The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter, and the Major, still smiling, closed his eyes and waited for oblivion. The Emperor's hand remained raised, golden fire gathering around his fingers. Power sufficient to erase the Major from existence, concentrated into a single, devastating release. The command center's surviving officers held their breath, caught between duty and self-preservation, uncertain whether to flee or die alongside their commander. But the Emperor did not strike. Not because he hesitated, not because he doubted his judgment, but because his psychic senses detected something the Major had not mentioned, something hidden in the dirigible's lower decks that transformed this confrontation from simple execution into tactical complexity. Hostages. The Emperor's awareness pierced through the Graf Zeppelin structure, identifying the cargo hold where Millennium had imprisoned approximately 200 British civilians. Captives taken during the initial assault, kept alive not from mercy, but as insurance against precisely this scenario. The Major's eyes opened, and his smile widened as he watched the Emperor's expression shift. Ah, the Major said softly. You found them, the civilians we collected during our descent. Insurance seemed prudent. Even the most powerful warrior might pause when innocents hang in the balance. Tell me, Emperor, does your absolute conviction extend to sacrificing 200 humans to eliminate one enemy commander? The Emperor's jaw tightened. You use humanity as a shield. You hide behind the very lives you claim to despise. What happened to the purity of violence, Major? This is cowardice dressed as strategy. It is pragmatism. the Major corrected, his tone carrying genuine amusement. I am a warrior, yes, but also a commander. My death serves my aesthetic perfectly, but only if it occurs at the proper moment. Dying now, with my forces still engaged across London, with the opera still building toward its crescendo, that would be premature. An artist does not rush the final act. You mistake yourself for the protagonist, the Emperor said coldly. You are not the artist, Major. You are the paint, crude pigment to be applied and discarded. Perhaps, the Major agreed, but even paint can choose where to splatter. Kill me now, and the Graf Zeppelin's automated systems will detonate the holds. 200 humans die instantly, or... He spread his hands in mock generosity. You can allow me to complete my performance. The hostages will be released when the battle concludes. Win or lose, they serve no further purpose. My word as an officer. The word of a Nazi vampire commander, the Emperor replied. Worthless. The word of a man who has never lied about his nature, the Major countered. I wage war for aesthetic reasons, yes, but I am not needlessly cruel. The civilians serve a tactical purpose currently. Once that purpose ends, I gain nothing from their deaths. Unlike you, Emperor, I do not pretend my violence serves higher morality. I simply execute it with style. The Emperor's mind raced through probabilities and solutions. He could tear through the ship's systems, disable the dead man switches, neutralize the explosives, and extract the hostages in approximately 47 seconds. But 47 seconds during which the Major and his officers could activate contingencies, trigger fail-safes, or simply detonate everything out of spite. The risk calculation was unacceptable. You have orchestrated this scenario carefully, the Emperor acknowledged, forcing me to choose between immediate justice and civilian preservation. You use my own principles as weapons against me. I use the only leverage available, the Major replied. You are stronger, faster, more powerful in every measurable way. But you are constrained by your purpose, to protect humanity. I am constrained by nothing except my own aesthetic sense. That asymmetry creates opportunities for those clever enough to exploit them. The Emperor slowly lowered his hand, the gathered energy dissipating. Very well, Major. You have earned a temporary reprieve. But understand, when your invasion fails, when your soldiers are destroyed and your grand opera concludes in ashes, you will answer for every human death tonight. And I will ensure your end is neither glorious nor meaningful. It will be simple erasure, the punishment for those who waste my time with theatrics. We shall see, the Major said, his smile never faltering. The night is young, Emperor. Many movements remain in this symphony. Perhaps I will earn my glorious death. Perhaps you will prove less constrained than you believe. Or perhaps... His eyes gleamed with genuine curiosity. Perhaps you will discover something about yourself you did not expect. War has a way of revealing truth. The Emperor turned without another word and tore back through the hull breach, descending toward London with controlled fury burning in his veins. The Major had proven more sophisticated than anticipated, not through power, but through understanding that even absolute force could be maneuvered with proper leverage. It was a lesson the Emperor had taught countless enemies across 40 millennia. True strength lay not in capacity for violence, but in willingness to employ it without hesitation. The Major had reversed that equation, using the Emperor's reluctance to sacrifice innocence as a weapon more effective than any freak soldier. Unacceptable. Below, the battle raged with renewed intensity. Alucard had fully embraced his released state, his shadows consuming entire blocks as he systematically annihilated Millennium's forces. But the vampire's method was inefficient. He toyed with his prey, savoring their terror, prolonging engagements for his own entertainment. 200 freak soldiers had fallen to his guns and familiars, but 300 more continued their assault across London's eastern districts. Iscariot's forces held Camden through sheer fanaticism and Anderson's near-immortal regeneration. The paladin carved through vampires like a holy threshing machine, his blessed bayonets finding hearts and skulls with surgical precision. But even he showed signs of strain, his regeneration slowing, his movements fractionally less precise. The Vatican's regenerators fought with suicidal courage, but Millennium's numerical advantage ground them down through attrition. And throughout it all, civilians died. Not in vast numbers, the initial evacuation protocols had moved millions to relative safety, but in the hundreds. Those too slow, too stubborn, or too unlucky to escape the combat zones. Each death registered on the Emperor's psychic senses like a tolling bell, marking failures he could not prevent. This was the fundamental problem with war. Even overwhelming power could not be everywhere simultaneously. The Emperor could destroy 1,000 vampires in minutes if they conveniently gathered in one location. But spread across London's vastness, operating in dispersed squad-level formations, they forced him to choose which humans to save and which to abandon to their fate. It was the calculus he had performed across 40,000 years, and he despised it no less now than he had during the Great Crusade's bloodiest campaigns. The Emperor descended into the city of London's financial district, Keek, where Seras Victoria's defensive position was collapsing under sustained assault. The young vampire fired her Harkonnen cannon with desperate precision, each explosive round destroying freak soldiers in spectacular fashion. But ammunition was finite, and the enemy was not. "Fall back," she shouted to her Hellsing support team, ordinary humans armed with blessed weaponry, brave but hopelessly outmatched. "Retreat to secondary positions. I'll cover—" The Emperor materialized beside her in a flash of golden light. Seras actually yelped in surprise, nearly dropping her cannon. "Your Majesty, we're being overrun. There's too many and they keep coming and—" "Silence," the Emperor commanded, not unkindly. "Conserve your ammunition. I will handle this." He stepped forward, placing himself between Seras's position and the advancing freak formations. Approximately 60 vampires converged on their location, moving with tactical discipline that would have impressed Imperial Guard commanders. They spread out, established overlapping fields of fire, prepared coordinated assault. The Emperor simply raised both hands. Psychic lightning erupted from his palms, not metaphorical energy, but literal electrical discharge channeled through telekinetic manipulation of local atmospheric conditions. Bolts of golden lightning arced across the battlefield, each one targeting a vampire with precognitive precision. The freak soldiers convulsed as millions of volts coursed through their bodies, cooking them from within. But electrical damage alone would not kill vampires with their regenerative capabilities. So the Emperor added the anathema. Where his lightning touched, golden fire ignited, the supernatural destroying essence of his being transmitted through the electrical medium. Vampires burst into flames that consumed not flesh, but the undead corruption animating them. Their screams cut off mid-cry as their freak chips melted and their stolen life force dissolved. Within 20 seconds, 60 vampires became 60 corpses. Seras stared, her mouth open in shock. That was... I've never seen. "You have witnessed what humanity can become when it transcends limitations," the Emperor said. "Remember this, Seras Victoria. You struggle against vampirism, fighting to retain your humanity despite supernatural corruption. That struggle has value, but the ultimate goal is not to master vampirism. It is to shed it entirely and reclaim what you were." Is that even possible? Saras asked, her voice small. I do not know, the Emperor admitted. Your condition differs from Alucard's. You were turned recently, your human soul still strong. Perhaps with sufficient willpower and proper guidance, the vampirism could be burned away while leaving your essential self intact. It would require psychic surgery of extraordinary precision, but... He paused, considering. When this war ends, if you truly desire it, I will attempt to restore your humanity. No promises of success, but I will try. Blood tears formed in Saras's eyes. You would do that? Even though you hate vampires? I hate what vampires represent. Parasitism, predation, supernatural corruption. But you, Saras Victoria, are not truly a vampire. You are a human infected with vampirism. There is a difference. And if I can cure that infection... The Emperor's expression softened fractionally. Then perhaps not all of this night's horrors will be irredeemable. Before Saras could respond, the Emperor's communication device crackled to life. Emperor, this is Integra. The director's voice was taut with stress. Alucard reports massive supernatural surge approaching from the south. Something beyond normal freak signatures. We think Millennium deployed a special weapon, possibly one of their elite operatives. I sense it, the Emperor confirmed, his psychic awareness already tracking the approaching presence. Designate? Target is broadcasting on open channels. Calls herself Rip Van Winkle, Millennium's first lieutenant. She's torn through our southern perimeter defenses. 12 casualties confirmed, 34 wounded. Her ability appears to be some form of impossible marksmanship. Single musket ball that never misses, never stops, continuously pursuing targets until they're destroyed. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. A cursed weapon. How very predictable. I will neutralize this threat. Continue coordinating primary defensive operations. He turned to Saras. Hold this position until reinforcements arrive. Do not pursue fleeing enemies. Let them run. Focus on protecting civilians, maintaining defensive integrity. Understood? Yes, Your Majesty. Saras saluted, her earlier despair replaced by renewed determination. The Emperor launched himself southward, psychic propulsion carrying him above London's rooftops at supersonic velocity. The sonic boom of his passage shattered windows below. But he calculated the acceptable collateral damage against the cost of delayed response. Rip Van Winkle stood atop a burning apartment complex in Southwark, her musket cradled casually as she surveyed the destruction below. She was tall and lean, with asymmetrical red hair and thick-rimmed glasses that gave her an almost bookish appearance. Until one noticed the manic gleam in her eyes and the way her fingers caressed her weapon like a lover. Bodies littered the street below. Hellsing soldiers, metropolitan police, a few unlucky civilians. Each had been killed by impossible shots. Bullets through eye sockets from a mile away, rounds that curved around cover, projectiles that pursued fleeing targets through buildings and vehicles. She hummed Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries as she reloaded, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. The Emperor landed 30 meters from her position, his arrival cracking the rooftop beneath him. Rip Van Winkle turned, and her smile widened with delight. Ah, der Golden. Herr Major said you would come. He said you would burn so very bright. He was right. You are beautiful, like a star brought low to earth. It will be such pleasure to kill you. You mistake confidence for capability, the Emperor replied. Your weapon is formidable against conventional opponents. Against me, it is a toy. We shall see, Rip Van Winkle sang, raising her musket. My magic bullet never misses, never stops, never surrenders. It pursues its target until either it strikes or reality itself breaks. Can your golden fire stop inevitability? She fired. The musket ball erupted from the barrel with a crack like thunder, but it did not follow a normal ballistic trajectory. Instead, it curved through the air like a living thing, adjusting its path mid-flight as it locked onto the Emperor's position. The projectile glowed with sickly green light, supernatural energy binding it to its purpose. The Emperor did not dodge. The bullet struck his psychic shield and stopped, hovering 3 inches from his chest plate. It vibrated with frustrated energy, trying to force its way through the invisible barrier. But the Emperor's will was absolute. Impossible, Rip Van Winkle breathed. Nothing stops der Zauberkugel. Nothing. I am not nothing, the Emperor replied. I am everything your cursed weapon is not. Order against chaos, reason against superstition, human perfection against supernatural corruption. The bullet continued struggling, its green glow intensifying as it burned through whatever reserves of mystical energy powered it. But the Emperor's shield did not waver. Finally, with a sound like breaking glass, the enchantment shattered. The musket ball fell harmlessly to the rooftop, now nothing more than a lump of lead. Rip Van Winkle's eyes widened behind her glasses. Nein, das ist nicht möglich. The Emperor raised his hand, and she flew backward, telekinetic force gripping her like a giant's fist. She slammed into the rooftop's edge, her musket clattering away, her breath driven from her lungs. Your major uses you as a weapon, the Emperor said, approaching her slowly. He sends you to die against an opponent you cannot defeat, not because he believes you will succeed, but because your failure serves his aesthetic. You are a brushstroke in his painting, nothing more. I am, Rip Van Winkle gasped, struggling against his psychic grip. I am Millennium. I serve der Major's vision. You serve a madman's vanity, the Emperor corrected. And now you will die for it, not gloriously, not meaningfully, simply efficiently. He clenched his fist, and Rip Van Winkle's body ignited with golden fire. Unlike freak soldiers, she was a true vampire, one of Millennium's. Elite, turned through genuine vampiric blood rather than artificial chips. Her regeneration was formidable, her vitality impressive. But against the anathema, regeneration was irrelevant. The fire consumed her from within, burning away the supernatural essence that animated her corpse. She screamed, a sound of genuine terror as she felt her existence dissolving. The souls she had consumed over decades of vampirism burned free, released from their binding. Her flesh collapsed into ash, her bones blackened and crumbled, and within seconds nothing remained but dust scattered on the London wind. The Emperor stood alone on the rooftop, the cursed musket lying powerless at his feet. One of Millennium's elite operatives, eliminated in less than 3 minutes. But even as he achieved this victory, his psychic senses detected the broader tactical situation continuing to deteriorate. The Major had orchestrated this invasion with diabolical precision, not to win militarily, but to create maximum chaos and force the Emperor to make impossible choices about where to deploy his power. Save civilians in the east and Iscariot's forces collapse in the north. Destroy Millennium's air support and ground forces overwhelm defensive positions. Pursue elite operatives and freak soldiers rampage through undefended districts. This was the Major's true genius, recognizing that even gods could be defeated through logistics and coordination. The Emperor's jaw tightened as he calculated the remaining freak soldier concentrations and estimated time to neutralization. 400 vampires remained operational. Without his intervention, British and Hellsing forces would eventually prevail, but casualties would reach unacceptable levels. Potentially thousands of additional civilian deaths, hundreds more military personnel lost. With his intervention, that number could be reduced to hundreds of civilian casualties and dozens of military losses. But only if he abandoned his pursuit of the Major. Only if he let the mastermind survive while eliminating pawns. The calculus was clear. The choice was obvious, and the Emperor despised it nonetheless. He launched himself back toward central London, where the densest vampire concentrations threatened the most lives. The Major would live to see his opera's conclusion, but when the final curtain fell, his fate was sealed. 2:34 a.m., Sunday, January 20th. London burned, but the tide had turned. The Emperor moved through the city like a cleansing fire, his presence alone creating dead zones where freak soldiers simply ceased to function. He had refined his technique over the past 3 hours, no longer needing direct confrontation to destroy Millennium's forces. His psychic aura expanded in controlled bursts, washing over entire districts and burning away vampiric corruption like infection before cauterization. 300 vampires eliminated through systematic advancement. Another 70 destroyed by Alucard, who had finally stopped toying with his prey and embraced efficient slaughter. Iscariot's forces, reinforced by the Emperor's intervention at critical moments, had held their positions and begun counter-offensives. British military, initially overwhelmed, now coordinated with supernatural allies to establish containment zones. But the cost had been severe. 417 civilians dead, 123 military personnel killed, significant portions of Westminster, Camden, and Southwark reduced to burning rubble. Big Ben's tower had collapsed completely, its famous bells now silent forever. Parliament's historic chambers were gutted by fire. The London Eye, somehow caught in the crossfire, listed dangerously over the Thames. And still the Graf Zeppelin II hung in the sky, its weapons sporadic now, but its presence a constant reminder that the Major orchestrated this carnage from relative safety. The Emperor stood atop what remained of the Tower Bridge, surveying the battlefield. His armor was scorched in places, splattered with ash that had once been vampires. But he remained functionally undamaged, his power undiminished despite hours of sustained combat. His communication device crackled. "Emperor, this is Integra. Final freak concentrations are being mopped up by combined forces. We estimate perhaps 30 to 40 vampires remain operational, scattered and disorganized. The invasion has failed tactically." A pause. "But London is devastated. The Prime Minister is demanding answers. The Queen has been evacuated to secure locations. The international community is screaming for explanations. And that damned dirigible still floats above us like a monument to our inability to end this." "The Major honors his word regarding hostages," the Emperor replied. "My psychic senses detect no hostile intent toward the civilians aboard his vessel. He keeps them alive because they serve his purpose, preventing me from simply destroying the Graf Zeppelin." "Then, we're at an impasse," Integra said, frustration evident in her voice. "We can't assault the ship without killing innocents. We can't leave it hovering indefinitely. What do you suggest?" "I suggest," the Emperor said, "that the Major desires confrontation. He has orchestrated this entire invasion to create specific circumstances. Circumstances that will reveal something he wishes to see. We will give him what he wants, but on our terms." "Explain." "Alucard hungers for meaningful combat. The Major represents one of the few opponents who has challenged him intellectually rather than merely physically. Their confrontation is inevitable. The Major has ensured it through careful manipulation. But Alucard will not fight carefully. He will not consider hostage safety or collateral damage. He will simply unleash his full power and revel in the destruction." "You want to send Alucard alone into the Graf Zeppelin?" Integra's tone sharpened. That's suicide even for him. The Major will have prepared countermeasures, traps, contingencies. Yes, the Emperor agreed. Which is why I will accompany him. Not as ally, but as insurance. I will ensure the hostages are extracted safely while Alucard satisfies his need for confrontation. The Major gets his dramatic finale. Alucard gets his meaningful battle. The hostages survive. And afterward, I will personally ensure the Major's death is neither glorious nor memorable. Silence, then. You're using Alucard as bait. I am using Alucard as Alucard wishes to be used, as a weapon pointed at worthy opposition. He has earned this confrontation through his service tonight. Let him have it, with appropriate supervision. He won't like being supervised, Integra warned. He will tolerate it, the Emperor replied. Because the alternative is me destroying the Graf Zeppelin with such overwhelming force that nothing remains, including his opportunity for the battle he craves. Another pause. Very well. I'll give Alucard the order to assault the Graf Zeppelin. But Emperor, if this goes wrong, if those hostages die because you miscalculated, then I will accept responsibility, the Emperor said simply. But I do not miscalculate. Trust in my capabilities, Sir Integra, even if you cannot trust my methods. The transmission ended. The Emperor reached out with his mind, psychic communication piercing through London's chaos to find the vampire's consciousness. Alucard, the Graf Zeppelin awaits. The Major has orchestrated this entire invasion to draw you to him. Will you grant him the confrontation he desires? Alucard's response was immediate, tinged with dark anticipation. Oh yes. I've been saving my appetite for that little man. He thinks himself an artist? I'll show him what true artistry looks like when painted in his own blood. You will board the Graf Zeppelin with my blessing, the Emperor continued. But understand, I will be present as well, not to fight your battle, but to ensure civilian casualties are minimized. You may have your confrontation with the Major. I will handle everything else. You want to watch, Alucard observed, amusement coloring his mental voice. You want to see what happens when the monster you've judged unworthy faces the monster who judges himself perfect. Interesting. Very well, Emperor. Let us both ascend to that floating theater. But when the Major and I dance, do not interfere. Some performances are meant to be duets, not symphonies. Agreed, the Emperor replied. But remember our compact. This battle is your test, vampire. Prove yourself worthy of redemption, or prove yourself worthy only of destruction. The choice is yours. They converged on the Graf Zeppelin's position. Two immortals ascending toward a floating fortress, drawn by different motivations toward the same inevitable confrontation. Alucard rose through his shadows, his form dissolving into liquid darkness that climbed the air like smoke. The Emperor ascended through psychic propulsion, golden light trailing behind him like a comet's tail. They arrived at the dirigible's hull simultaneously, two opposing forces united temporarily by common purpose. After you, Emperor, Alucard said, his grin wide and feral. Age before beauty. Monstrosity before divinity, the Emperor replied dryly, and tore open the hull with telekinetic force. They entered together. The Graf Zeppelin's interior was a maze of corridors and compartments, designed for military efficiency rather than comfort. But Millennium soldiers had abandoned their posts. The Emperor's psychic senses detected only minimal crew remaining, most having evacuated during the battle's chaotic height. Only the command center remained fully staffed, and only because the Major had ordered them to stay. The Emperor and Alucard moved through the corridors with shared purpose, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. They spoke little. What was there to say? Both knew this convergence was inevitable from the moment Millennium had deployed. Both recognized the Major's manipulations for what they were. And both, in their own ways, accepted the roles assigned them. They found the hostages first, secured in the cargo hold as intelligence had indicated. 217 civilians, men, women, children, huddled in terrified silence. Guards who should have been watching them had fled, leaving only locked doors between the captives and freedom. The Emperor gestured, and the locks shattered. Psychic energy flooded through the hostages' minds, not controlling them, but guiding them, showing them the safest evacuation route through the damaged dirigible. They moved as one, following his mental directions without conscious understanding, flowing toward emergency exits and evacuation equipment. "Impressive," Alucard observed. "You puppeteer them gently. I would have simply commanded. You prefer to suggest." "Free will matters," the Emperor replied. "Even when exercising it leads to suboptimal choices. These civilians will evacuate because I have shown them the path, not because I have stolen their agency." "Philosophical distinctions that make no practical difference," Alucard said. "But I suppose that's what separates us. You care about the method. I care only about results. Which is why you remain a monster," the Emperor noted, "and I remain human." They continued toward the command center, leaving the evacuating hostages behind. The Emperor's psychic senses monitored their progress. They would reach safety within minutes, descending via emergency rappelling equipment to British military positions below. The Major's final leverage was dissolving, and he knew it. They found him in the command center, standing alone save for the doctor and warrant officer Schrödinger. The surviving command staff had been dismissed, sent to their deaths or evacuations. It mattered little. Only the core leadership remained, waiting for their guests with the patient anticipation of those who had choreographed every step of this dance. "Gentlemen," the Major greeted them, his arms spread wide in welcome. "The stars of our opera finally take the stage together. Alucard, the monster who wishes to die, the Emperor, the tyrant who wishes to save, and me, the artist who wishes only to witness perfection. What a cast we have assembled." "Your hostages are evacuating," the Emperor said flatly. "Your leverage is gone. Your invasion has failed. Your soldiers are destroyed. Surrender, and I will ensure your death is quick." "Surrender?" The Major laughed. Genuine, delighted laughter. "Why would I surrender when the performance has finally reached its crescendo?" "No, Emperor. The hostages served their purpose, keeping you distracted while I prepared the true finale. And now..." He nodded to Schrödinger, who smiled and placed something on the command console, a small, unremarkable device that pulsed with sickly green light. "What is that?" Alucard demanded, his shadows beginning to writhe. "Insurance," the Major replied. "A quantum destabilization bomb, for lack of better terminology. Schrödinger's unique existence allows him to exist in superposition across multiple states. This device weaponizes that principle. When activated, it will collapse every quantum state within a half-mile radius into a single, catastrophic outcome. The graph, Zeppelin, will cease to exist. The surrounding airspace will cease to exist. And everything within that sphere, including all of us, will be reduced to fundamental particles. A suicide weapon, the Emperor said, his eyes narrowing. You threaten mutual annihilation. I promise mutual annihilation, the Major corrected. Because that is what I have wanted from the beginning. Not victory, not conquest, but the perfect ending. We die together, locked in combat, our philosophical opposition resolved through the ultimate equalizer. Is that not beautiful? That is insane, Alucard growled, but his grin had returned. But I suppose I expected nothing less. Very well, Major. You want war to the last breath? You want to drag us all into oblivion? Then come, let us paint our masterpiece in each other's blood. The Emperor calculated rapidly. The quantum bomb was genuine. His psychic senses detected the unstable probability field surrounding it. Disarming it would require manipulating quantum states beyond his current capabilities. Destroying it might trigger premature detonation. And the Major's hand hovered over the activation switch, ready to collapse all possibilities into extinction. You cannot win, the Major said, his smile radiant. If you kill me, my hand triggers the device. If you disable me psychically, the Doctor activates it as contingency. If you flee, I detonate it anyway to ensure our mutual destruction. The only choice you have is how we die, fighting gloriously or fleeing futilely. There is a third option, the Emperor said quietly. Oh? The Major's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Please, enlighten me. I let Alucard have what he wants, the Emperor replied. His battle with you, uninterrupted. And while you two indulge in your mutual death wish, I remove this entire section of the dirigible from reality. The Major blinked. I'm sorry, what? Teleportation on massive scale, the Emperor explained, his eyes blazing as he gathered. Power. I will transport this command center, with you, Alucard, and your quantum bomb, to an isolated location where your detonation harms no one. The Thames estuary, perhaps. Sufficiently distant from civilian populations, adequately remote for your mutual destruction to be merely a curiosity rather than a catastrophe. You can't possibly, the Doctor began. The Emperor's psychic power erupted. Reality screamed as he tore a hole through dimensional space, his will overriding physical laws through sheer force of conviction. The command center lurched, its connection to the rest of the Graf Zeppelin severing as it was pulled through the psychic portal he had created. Schrödinger vanished, his quantum nature unable to maintain coherence through dimensional transition. The Doctor stumbled, his instruments sparking and failing. The Major's eyes widened with something approaching genuine surprise, and Alucard laughed, a sound of pure, delighted madness. The command center materialized above the Thames estuary, 20 miles from London, suspended in mid-air through the Emperor's telekinetic hold. The lights of the city glowed distant on the horizon. The water below stretched black and cold. There, the Emperor said, his voice resonating with effort. You have your stage, Major. Remote, isolated, meaningless. Fight your battle. Detonate your bomb. Die your glorious death. But do it where your nihilism harms no one but yourselves. The Major stared at him, then at Alucard, then back. And slowly, incredibly, his smile returned, wider than before, tinged with something approaching respect. You absolute madman, he said softly. You actually did it. You gave me exactly what I wanted while stripping away all meaning. A private stage for a performance with no audience. A glorious death that signifies nothing. The perfect synthesis of giving me victory while denying me triumph. Yes, the Emperor agreed. Now fight your battle or detonate your device. Either way, this opera concludes here and now. Alucard stepped forward, his shadows exploding outward. Finally, no interruptions, no distractions. Just you and me, Major. Let's see if your philosophy can withstand 9 million souls screaming for your blood. The Major's hand moved toward his sidearm, his expression ecstatic, and the Emperor stepped backward, his form beginning to fade. Wait, the Major called out. You're leaving? You won't even watch? No, the Emperor said. his voice growing distant as he prepared to teleport away. "Because you don't deserve an audience, Major. Your death will be witnessed only by the monster you created through your obsession with him. No glory, no artistry, just two damaged beings destroying each other in the darkness. That is my judgment upon you. Not execution, but irrelevance." The Major's face twisted. Whether in rage or appreciation, the Emperor could not determine. Then he was gone, returning to London through the same psychic portal he had used to transport the command center. Behind him, in the isolated darkness above the Thames estuary, Alucard and the Major began their final dance. Two philosophers of violence, locked in combat that would end only when one or both ceased to exist. The quantum bomb pulsed with increasing intensity, counting down to inevitable detonation. And the Emperor turned his attention back to London, where the real work of protecting humanity continued. The Emperor materialized on the embankment, the psychic strain of mass teleportation evident in the slight dimming of his golden aura. Around him, London struggled to process what had occurred. Emergency services overwhelmed, military forces securing perimeters, civilians emerging from shelters to witness their city transformed into a war zone. The Graf Zeppelin II, now missing its command center, began its death spiral. Without the Major's coordination and the control systems housed in that section, the massive dirigible lost stability. It listed sharply, its engines sputtering, and began a slow but inevitable descent toward the Thames. The Emperor watched dispassionately as it crashed into the river with a tremendous splash. Its hydrogen cells miraculously not ignited during the battle, hissing as water rushed in through torn compartments. No explosion, no final conflagration. Just an ignominious end to Millennium's flagship, sinking into the Thames like any other defeated vessel. His communication device crackled. "Emperor, what the hell just happened?" Integra's voice carried equal parts relief and fury. One moment the Graf Zeppelin was intact. The next, its entire command section vanished and Alucard's psychic signature disappeared with it. "I removed the Major and your vampire to a remote location," the Emperor explained, his voice steady despite the exertion. "They wished for private combat. I granted it, along with sufficient isolation that their mutual destruction will harm no one. You just teleported an entire section of the dirigible?" Integra's tone shifted to something approaching awe. "That's not possible. The energy requirements alone are irrelevant when one has 40,000 years to refine psychic disciplines," the Emperor replied. The Major threatened detonation of a quantum destabilization device. Disarming it was impractical. Removing it was simple. A long silence then. "Is Alucard going to survive this?" "Unknown," the Emperor admitted. "He faces an opponent who has orchestrated everything to achieve mutual destruction, armed with a weapon that can collapse probability itself. The vampire's regeneration is formidable, but not infinite. He may prevail. He may perish. He may achieve the meaningful death he has sought for centuries." "And you're fine with that?" Integra's voice hardened. "Just abandoning him?" "He made his choice," the Emperor said. "I offered him the opportunity for redemption through service. He has served admirably tonight, destroying hundreds of Millennium's forces. But when given the choice between tactical withdrawal and glorious combat, he chose violence. That is his nature. I will not mourn a predator who finally found prey capable of killing him." Another silence, longer this one. Finally, "If he dies, I will hold you responsible." "That is your right," the Emperor acknowledged. "Though I suspect you underestimate your servant's capacity for survival. Alucard has..." Endured for centuries because he's not merely powerful, he is cunning. If anyone can survive the Major's final gambit, it is him. As if in response to this statement, a psychic shockwave rippled across the Emperor's awareness. 20 miles distant, above the Thames estuary, reality itself convulsed. The quantum bomb had detonated. The Emperor's senses perceived the event in exquisite detail. Probability fields collapsing, multiple timelines converging into a single catastrophic outcome. Matter and energy dissolving into fundamental particles. The Major's command center ceased to exist, along with everything within a half-mile sphere. The Doctor erased, the quantum device consumed by its own detonation. The Major annihilated in the perfect ending he had orchestrated. And Alucard? The vampire's psychic signature fragmented, scattered across the dimensional boundaries like shattered glass. The Emperor felt the moment of dissolution, 9 million souls screaming in unison as their container was destroyed, consciousness dispersing across reality's quantum foam. But there, a thread, a fragment, a single point of coherent identity holding together against entropy's pull. Vlad Tepes, the man beneath the monster, refusing to surrender even as reality itself tried to erase him. The Emperor's eyes widened fractionally. Remarkable. Even faced with complete quantum dissolution, the vampire's core self, the human buried beneath centuries of corruption, maintained coherence through sheer will. He would reform, eventually. It might take days, weeks, perhaps months. But Alucard would claw his way back from effective non-existence because the alternative was unacceptable to whatever remained human in his psyche. "Your servant lives," the Emperor said into the communication device. Barely. Dispersed across dimensional boundaries, his consciousness fragmented but not destroyed. He will return, though diminished and weakened. When he does, ensure he understands the price of his hubris. He's alive. Integra's relief was palpable. Thank God. I thank you, Emperor, for not letting him die alone. I did not save him, the Emperor corrected. He saved himself through the strength of will that makes him more than simple monster. Remember that when judging him, Sir Integra. Alucard is damned, yes, but he is also stubbornly, frustratingly human in ways that matter. The Emperor terminated the communication and surveyed London's devastation. Dawn approached, the sky lightening from black to deep purple, stars fading as the sun prepared its inevitable return. In that growing light, the true scope of Millennium's assault became visible. 417 civilians dead, as he had calculated. 123 military personnel lost. But those numbers, terrible as they were, represented success rather than failure. Without his intervention, without Hellsing's coordination, without Iscariot's fanatical defense, the toll would have reached thousands. Still, 417 souls extinguished. 417 lives ended because the Major had decided London would be his canvas for philosophical expression. Unacceptable. The Emperor's jaw tightened as he made a decision. The Major was gone, yes, erased from existence by his own weapon. But Millennium still existed. The organization's infrastructure remained intact, hidden in facilities across Europe. Scientists who had developed freak technology, officers who had coordinated this invasion, foot soldiers who had committed atrocities in service of nihilistic ideology. They would answer for their actions. Not today. Not while London required his attention for recovery and reconstruction. But soon. When the immediate crisis passed, when the dead were buried and the wounded healed, the Emperor would turn his attention to Millennium's remnants. And he would show them that escaping divine judgment was simple compared to escaping his. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of coordination and consequence management. The British government, initially paralyzed by the scale of the attack, mobilized under the Emperor's subtle psychic guidance. The Prime Minister, still reeling from the realization that vampires were real and had nearly destroyed London, found himself making decisions that aligned suspiciously well with optimal recovery strategies. The international community demanded answers. The Emperor provided them, not directly, but through carefully crafted psychic suggestions that led investigators to conclude this had been a terrorist attack by an extremist paramilitary organization. Supernatural elements were classified, hidden, relegated to conspiracy theories that mainstream media would dismiss. Humanity was not ready for the truth. Not yet. Iscariot withdrew back to Vatican territory, Archbishop Maxwell surprisingly subdued after witnessing the Emperor's capabilities firsthand. Alexander Anderson departed with a curt nod of respect, the only acknowledgement the Paladin would offer to one whose philosophy he despised, but whose effectiveness he could not deny. And through it all, the Emperor worked. He walked among survivors, his presence providing comfort they could not articulate. He guided rescue teams to trapped civilians, his psychic senses detecting life signs beneath rubble. He stabilized collapsing structures through telekinetic reinforcement, preventing secondary casualties. He burned away the last scattered freak soldiers who had survived the initial purge, ensuring no vampiric remnants escaped to breed new horrors. On the third day after the invasion, Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing requested a private meeting. They met in what remained of the Hellsing estate's war room. The mansion had survived the assault intact. Millennium's forces had focused on London proper rather than rural targets. But it felt diminished somehow, as if the weight of recent events had drained vitality from even stone and steel. Integra looked exhausted, her characteristic composure frayed at the edges. She had not slept more than a few hours since the invasion began, coordinating recovery efforts while simultaneously managing the political fallout. Her cigarillo burned between her fingers, forgotten. "The Queen wishes to meet you," she said without preamble. "The Prime Minister as well. They want to offer you, I don't even know what. Knighthood? Command position in the armed forces? Cabinet-level advisory role?" "I decline," the Emperor said simply. "I am not interested in titles or political authority within your governmental structure." "I told them you'd say that," Integra replied with a ghost of a smile. "But they insisted I ask. What do you want, Emperor? You've saved London. You've proven your capabilities beyond any doubt. What comes next?" The Emperor stood silent for a long moment, considering the question. What did he want? In his original reality, he had wanted to unite humanity under the Imperial truth, to free his species from religious superstition and supernatural threat through reason and force. That dream had failed, corrupted by time and necessity into the very theocracy he had sought to prevent. Here, in this smaller universe, he had been given an opportunity to try again, to implement his vision without the compromises that had doomed the Imperium, to prove that humanity could triumph over the supernatural without becoming monstrous itself. But Millennium's invasion had revealed uncomfortable truths. He had been forced to compromise, to allow the Major to live temporarily because hostages provided leverage, to coordinate with organizations whose philosophies he despised, to accept casualties he could not prevent because even omnipotence had geographical limitations. The Imperial truth demanded absolutes. Reality provided only gradients. "I want," the Emperor said slowly, "to understand whether humanity in this universe can be elevated to supremacy over supernatural threats without requiring a tyrant to guide them. Hellsing employs a vampire as weapon. Iscariot channels faith into genuine power, Your military develops contingencies for enemies that should not exist. You have adapted to the supernatural rather than seeking to eliminate it. I want to determine if that adaptation is strength or weakness. You're still judging us, Integra observed. Always, the Emperor confirmed. That is my purpose. To assess, to guide, to intervene when necessary, and withdraw when possible. The Imperium I built in my reality failed because I could not remain distant. I became the god I sought to deny, worshipped despite, because of, my power. Here, I have the opportunity to avoid that fate, to protect without dominating, to guide without commanding. And if we fail your test? Integra asked quietly. If you decide humanity here is irredeemable? The Emperor's expression hardened. Then I will implement the Imperial truth through whatever means necessary, and hope this iteration proves more successful than the last. Integra met his gaze unflinching. Then I suppose we'd better not fail. She stood, adjusting her suit jacket in a gesture that restored some of her usual authority. For what it's worth, Emperor, I don't agree with your philosophy. I think your absolute certainty is dangerous. I think your dismissal of faith and supernatural power as superstition ignores evidence literally surrounding us. But she paused, choosing words carefully. But I also think you saved thousands of lives during Millennium's assault. I think your power, used responsibly, makes you the single most effective defensive asset on the planet. And I think, despite your claims of cold rationality, you care about humanity in a way that makes you more than the tyrant you fear becoming. The Emperor almost smiled at that. Careful, Sir Integra. Compliments from you are rarer than Alucard's restraint. Don't let it go to your head, she replied dryly. You're still an arrogant, interfering, philosophically inflexible pain in the ass. But you're our arrogant, interfering, philosophically inflexible pain in the ass. At least for now. At least for now, the Emperor agreed. They stood in companionable silence, two leaders who would never fully agree, but could at least respect each other's commitment to humanity's protection. Finally, Integra asked the question that had been weighing on her. When Alucard returns, and you say he will, what happens then? You still consider him an abomination. You've promised him either redemption or destruction. Which will it be? The Emperor's eyes blazed as he considered the vampire's fractured consciousness slowly coalescing across dimensional boundaries. That depends, he said, on what emerges when he reforms. If he returns as the monster who revels in violence, he will face my judgment. But if he returns as the man struggling against his own damnation, the Emperor's voice softened fractionally, then perhaps there is hope even for the damned. 5 days after Millennium's invasion, Seras Victoria approached the Emperor with a request that took him by surprise. She found him atop the repaired Tower Bridge, watching the Thames flow past as reconstruction crews worked on damaged buildings throughout the city. She climbed the stairs with vampire speed, but stopped respectfully at a distance before speaking. Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. During the battle, you said you might be able to cure my vampirism, to make me human again. Did you mean that? The Emperor turned to face her, studying the young vampire who had fought with such determination to protect civilians during the assault. She had saved 17 lives through direct intervention, carried wounded to safety, held defensive positions when more experienced soldiers had broken. She had proven herself worthy. Yes, he said. I meant it. The procedure would be dangerous. Psychic surgery of unprecedented precision, burning away vampiric corruption while preserving your essential consciousness. The success rate is uncertain. You might emerge human. You might emerge dead. You might emerge as something between states, neither alive nor undead. Are you willing to accept those risks? Saras swallowed hard, but nodded. I am. I hate what I've become. I hate drinking blood, even from bags. I hate being faster and stronger than human, while knowing it's because I'm a parasite. I want to be me again. Just me. Not some supernatural thing wearing my face. The Emperor's expression softened, a rare occurrence that transformed his stern features into something almost gentle. Then we will make the attempt, he said. Not today. You need time to prepare mentally, and I need to analyze your specific vampiric corruption to determine optimal approach. But within the month, we will try. If I succeed, you will be the first vampire in this universe's history to reclaim humanity after transformation. If I fail, then at least I tried. Saras finished. That's more than most vampires can say. Indeed, the Emperor agreed. She hesitated, then asked, Why do you care? You could just destroy me like you destroyed all those Millennium vampires. Why offer to help? Because, the Emperor said, you represent what humanity should be. Unwilling to accept corruption, fighting to retain your essence despite supernatural influence. Choosing to protect others even when transformation has given you power to dominate them. You are not a vampire, Saras Victoria. You are a human cursed with vampirism. There is a fundamental difference, and I will not punish you for circumstances beyond your control. Tears, blood tears, formed in her eyes. Thank you. Just thank you. The Emperor nodded, dismissing her with a gesture that was not unkind. When she had gone, he returned his attention to London's skyline, watching the sun, set over a city that had survived apocalypse. Millennium was defeated. The Major was erased. His 1,000 vampires were destroyed. But the Emperor knew this was not conclusion, merely prologue. This universe contained other threats, other monsters, other philosophies that would challenge his own. The road ahead stretched long, complicated by factors he had not fully anticipated. But for now, in this moment, he had protected humanity without becoming their tyrant. He had wielded absolute power while respecting free will. He had proven, at least to himself, that the imperial truth could be implemented without the failures that had plagued the Imperium. It was a beginning, nothing more. But beginnings mattered. The Emperor of Mankind stood vigil over London as night fell, his golden armor reflecting the city's lights like a beacon. Wars would come, threats would emerge, judgment would be rendered. But tonight, humanity had survived. And that was enough. 3 weeks after Millennium's failed invasion, London had begun the long process of healing. Big Ben's tower was being rebuilt, its reconstruction symbolizing Britain's refusal to bow before terror. Parliament's chambers were gutted and restored, every stone laid with defiant precision. The dead were honored in ceremonies that filled Westminster Abbey, their names carved into memorial walls that would stand for generations. The living moved forward, as humanity always did, carrying their scars, but refusing to be defined by them. And in the shadows of this recovery, the Emperor of Mankind prepared to fulfill his promises. He stood in a specially prepared chamber beneath the Hellsing estate, psychic wards etched into every surface to contain the energies about to be unleashed. Saras Victoria lay on a medical table at the room's center, her eyes wide but determined, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Integra watched from the observation window, her expression carefully neutral. Walter stood beside her, his aged hands clasped behind his back. They had both witnessed impossible things in their service to Hellsing, but this, attempting to cure vampirism itself, transcended everything they thought they understood about supernatural corruption. "Are you ready?" the Emperor asked Saras, his voice gentle despite its power. "Yes," she whispered. "Whatever happens, thank you for trying." The Emperor placed his hands above her chest, not touching but hovering inches away. Golden light began to emanate from his palms, growing in intensity until the entire chamber blazed with illumination that seemed to pierce through matter itself. His consciousness dove into Saras's being, psychic senses tracing the vampiric corruption that had rewoven her physiology. He saw the changes wrought by Alucard's blood: enhanced cellular structure, supernatural regeneration, the hunger that burned in her veins like acid. But beneath it all, he found what he had hoped to discover: her human soul, intact and fighting, refusing to surrender despite the transformation. With surgical precision born from millennia of experience, the Emperor began to burn. Golden fire erupted within Saras's body, not consuming her, but targeting only the vampiric corruption. She screamed, her back arching, every nerve alight with agony as the anathema nature of his power stripped away on death cell by cell. Her enhanced regeneration fought against the purging, trying to restore what he was destroying, creating a war within her flesh. The Emperor's will proved stronger. He burned away the supernatural elements while simultaneously using biomancy to rebuild human equivalents. Where vampiric cells dissolved, he wove new human tissue. Where corrupted blood boiled away, he stimulated her bone marrow to produce fresh, mortal hemoglobin. Where the hunger had carved pathways through her nervous system, he cauterized and rerouted. It was the most delicate work he had performed in centuries, requiring absolute focus and unprecedented precision. Integra gripped the window frame, her knuckles white. "She's dying," she said, her voice tight. "Her vital signs." "She is transforming," Walter corrected quietly, his eyes never leaving the scene below. "Look at her aura. It's changing from undead to something else." The process lasted 17 minutes, an eternity measured in Saras's screams, each one tearing at the Emperor's resolve. But he did not stop, could not stop. Her survival depended on completing the transformation, and hesitation now would doom her to existence trapped between states. Finally, with a sound like reality sighing in relief, the process concluded. The golden light faded. Saras collapsed back onto the table, her body convulsing once, twice, then going still. The Emperor stepped back, his power dimming, exhaustion evident in his posture for the first time since his arrival in this universe. "Is she?" Integra began. Saras's chest rose, fell, rose, again, breathing. Not the unnecessary pantomime vampires sometimes performed, but genuine respiration. Her heartbeat, once a sluggish rhythm maintained by supernatural animation, now a strong, steady pulse of purely human biology. Her eyes opened, and they were blue. Not the red-tinged blue of a vampire fighting her nature, but clear, human blue. She whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm warm. I'm actually warm, and I'm hungry, not for blood, just regular hungry. Like I haven't eaten in days. Oh God, it worked. It actually worked." She sat up, tears streaming down her face. Clear tears now, not blood. Her hands trembled as she touched her face, her arms, marveling at the simple miracle of human sensation. The Emperor steadied himself against the chamber wall, the strain evident. "You are human again, Saras Victoria. The first vampire in recorded history to be cured rather than destroyed. Remember this. Remember that even supernatural corruption can be overcome through sufficient will and power. You are living proof that redemption is possible." "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Thank yourself," he interrupted. "Your human soul held together through the transformation. Without that foundation, no amount of my power could have saved you. You fought for your humanity, and you won." Integra's composure finally cracked. She pressed a hand to the window, her expression one of wonder mixed with something approaching religious awe. "If you can do this, if you can cure vampirism itself, I can cure one vampire who retained enough humanity to provide an anchor," the Emperor corrected. "Alucard's condition is far more advanced. His human soul buried beneath centuries of corruption and millions of consumed souls. I do not know if he can be saved. But Ceres Victoria proves the possibility exists." In the days that followed, word of Ceres's cure spread through the supernatural community like wildfire. Vampires across Europe reacted with everything from desperate hope to furious denial. Some saw it as salvation, proof that their damnation was not permanent. Others viewed it as blasphemy, an affront to the natural order of undeath. 3 lesser vampires attempted to infiltrate England, seeking the Emperor's intervention. He destroyed 2, allowed the 3rd to speak. "Please," the vampire begged, his ancient features twisted with desperation. "I have existed for 4 centuries. I have fed on thousands. But I remember being human. I remember loving, hoping, dreaming. Can you save me as you saved the girl?" The Emperor studied him with psychic senses that saw truth beneath deception. What he found was not encouraging. This vampire had reveled in his predation for centuries, had tortured and killed for pleasure as much as sustenance, had surrendered his humanity willingly in exchange for power. "No," the Emperor said simply. "Ceres Victoria fought against her vampirism from the moment of transformation. You embraced yours. The corruption runs too deep. Your human soul is not merely buried, it is dissolved, consumed by the monster you chose to become. There is nothing left to save." "Please," the vampire repeated. "I can change. I can... You can die?" the Emperor interrupted. "It is the only mercy you deserve." Golden fire erupted, and the vampire burned to ash, his screams echoing across the Thames embankment. The message was clear. Redemption was possible, but only for those who had never stopped fighting for it. 1 month after the invasion, Alucard returned. His reformation began as shadows coalescing in the Hellsing estate's subterranean chambers, the same cells where he had spent centuries in voluntary imprisonment. The process was slow, agonizing, his scattered consciousness pulling itself together atom by atom, memory by memory, soul by soul. When he finally manifested fully, he was diminished. The millions of souls he had consumed over centuries were gone, scattered beyond recovery by the quantum bomb's detonation. What remained was Vlad Tepes, the original vampire, the man who had chosen damnation over death, stripped of the power he had accumulated through centuries of feeding. He was still formidable, still capable of regeneration, superhuman speed and strength, shadow manipulation. But he was no longer the overwhelming force that had terrorized enemies for 400 years. He was simply Alucard, the no-life king reduced to his essential self. The Emperor was waiting when consciousness fully returned. They stood in Alucard's chamber, immortal and undead, separated by mere feet and infinite philosophical distance. "So," Alucard said, his voice carrying none of its usual mockery, "I survived. The Major gave me the death I sought, and I clawed my way back from oblivion anyway. How disappointingly predictable." "You survived," the Emperor agreed, "because some part of you refuses to surrender. The human buried beneath the monster, still fighting, after 5 centuries. That is not disappointment, vampire. That is hope." Alucard's expression twisted with something approaching anguish. Hope for what? I am still damned, still a predator, still the creature that has consumed millions and will hunger for millions more. What hope exists for such as me? The Emperor stepped closer, his presence filling the chamber with golden radiance that made Alucard's shadows recoil instinctively. The hope, he said, that you might choose differently. I have cured Sarah's Victoria of her vampirism. She is human again, restored to what she was before transformation. But her corruption was recent, her human soul still strong. Yours. He paused, considering. Yours is buried beneath centuries of accumulated damnation. I do not know if you can be saved. Then why not simply destroy me? Alucard demanded. You have judged me unworthy. You have promised me either redemption or annihilation. I have failed your test. End it. No, the Emperor said, quietly. Because during Millennium's invasion, you made choices that mattered. You protected civilians when you could have simply hunted for pleasure. You coordinated with Hellsing's forces rather than operating as lone predator. You faced the Major knowing death was probable, and you did it to save hostages rather than for your own gratification. These actions, vampire, suggest that Vlad Tepes still exists beneath the monster's skin. Alucard's eyes, those blood-red eyes that had witnessed centuries of horror, widened fractionally. You're saying what exactly? I am saying, the Emperor replied, that your judgment is postponed. You have proven yourself more than simple abomination, but less than redeemed. You exist in liminal space, and only you can determine which direction you move from here. Continue as you have, serving Hellsing, protecting humanity, fighting against your own nature. And perhaps redemption becomes possible. Surrender to predation, revel in your monstrosity, and I will grant you the oblivion you claim to desire. And if I choose neither? Alucard asked. If I simply exist, unchanging? Then we remain in stalemate, the Emperor said. And when your master's bloodline eventually ends, when the last Hellsing passes and your binding dissolves, we will meet again. And then, vampire, your judgment will be rendered absolutely. They stood in silence, two beings who had both lived beyond normal human comprehension, both shaped by violence and duty into something greater and lesser than mortal understanding. Finally, Alucard inclined his head, not a bow, but acknowledgement. Very well, Emperor. I will continue to serve, continue to fight, continue to hope, however futilely, that the man I was might somehow be reclaimed from the monster I became. But I make no promises of success. I have failed at redemption for 5 centuries. Another attempt seems optimistic. Optimism, the Emperor said, is humanity's greatest strength. The Akari ability to hope despite evidence, to strive despite failure, to believe despite damnation. If you can maintain that optimism, vampire, then perhaps you are more human than you believe. The Emperor turned to leave, then paused at the chamber's threshold. One final thing, he said without looking back. The Major was wrong about you. He believed you were a monster who wished for death. But I have seen your core self, the consciousness that held together through quantum dissolution. You are not a monster who wishes for death. You are a man who wishes for absolution. There is a difference. And that difference, Alucard, is why I have not destroyed you. He departed, leaving the vampire alone in the darkness. Alucard stood motionless for long minutes, processing words no one had spoken to him in centuries. Then, slowly, he sank into his throne-like chair and laughed, a sound of bitter amusement and something that might have been hope. absolution. He whispered to the shadows. After 500 years of damnation, the Emperor offers absolution. Either he's the wisest being I've ever encountered, or the maddest. Perhaps both. His laughter faded, replaced by contemplative silence. And in that silence, Vlad Tepes, the man beneath the monster, wondered if redemption might truly be possible after all. 6 weeks after Millennium's invasion, the Emperor prepared to depart London. Not permanently, this world still required his attention, still demanded judgment upon its supernatural threats. But his immediate work was complete. Millennium's remnants had been systematically eliminated across Europe, their facilities destroyed, their scientists brought to justice, both legal and absolute. London had recovered sufficiently that his presence was no longer essential for stability. And he had learned what he needed to know. Humanity in this universe could survive supernatural threats. They adapted, compromised, employed monsters against monsters when necessary. It was not the pure implementation of imperial truth that he would have preferred, but it worked. More importantly, it worked without requiring a god emperor to guide every decision. Sir Integra met him one final time before his departure, atop the fully reconstructed Tower Bridge. The city spread below them, vibrant and alive, despite its recent trauma. "You're leaving," she said, statement, not question. "For now," the Emperor confirmed. "I will return periodically to assess humanity's progress, to eliminate threats beyond your capacity to handle, to ensure the supernatural does not overwhelm the natural. But I will not remain constantly. You must learn to stand without my shadow looming over you." "And your judgment?" Integra asked. "Have we passed your test?" The Emperor considered the question with the weight it deserved. "You have proven," he said finally, "that humanity can adapt to supernatural reality without losing its essential nature. You employ monsters, but remain fundamentally human. You acknowledge faith's power while maintaining secular governance. You compromise with necessity while preserving principles. It is not the path I would have chosen. But..." He paused, something almost approaching a smile crossing his features. "But perhaps that is the point. Humanity must forge its own path, even when that path differs from what I would design." "So we passed," Integra said, relief evident in her tone. "You survived," the Emperor corrected. "Whether that constitutes passing depends on what comes next. But for now, you have earned the right to continue without my direct intervention. That is no small achievement." He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes blazing with intensity. "Remember this, Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing. I have given you a gift I never gave the Imperium, true independence. I will not command you. I will not demand worship. I will not impose my will except when absolute necessity demands it. Use this freedom wisely. Prove that humanity can triumph over darkness without becoming tyrannical itself. And if you fail," his expression hardened, "then I will return, and my judgment will be absolute." "We won't fail," Integra said with conviction. "Humanity has survived worse than vampires and Nazi invasions. We'll survive whatever comes next." "I believe you will," the Emperor said. And in that moment, he meant it. He had come to this universe expecting to implement the imperial truth, to guide humanity forcibly toward perfection, to repeat the patterns that had defined his existence for 40,000 years. Instead, he had learned that perhaps the greatest wisdom was knowing when not to act, when to observe rather than command, when to trust humanity to find its own way, even when that way seemed flawed and inefficient. It was a lesson that would have served the Imperium well, had he learned it 10,000 years earlier. But the multiverse offered infinite opportunities for growth, infinite chances to correct past mistakes, and the Emperor of mankind, though ancient beyond measure, was still capable of learning. He stepped off the tower bridge, his form dissolving into golden light that spiraled upward into the morning sky. His presence faded from London gradually, like dawn retreating before full day, until only the faintest psychic impression remained. A promise that he would return if needed, but a hope that he would not be. Below, Integra lit a cigarillo and watched him go. "God help us all," she muttered. "An ancient tyrant who thinks he's giving us freedom by not conquering us immediately. This should end well." But despite her sardonic tone, she smiled. Because London had survived. Hellsing had survived. Humanity had survived. And sometimes, survival was enough. The Emperor of mankind departed into the spaces between realities, carrying with him the lessons of this small universe. The Imperium still waited in his original reality, 10,000 years into a future where he sat upon the golden throne, worshipped as the god he had always denied being. But perhaps, armed with the understanding he had gained here, he might find a way to reach back through time and alter that trajectory. Perhaps the Imperium could be saved from its own devotion. Perhaps humanity could be elevated without being enslaved. Or perhaps this universe would remain his refuge, a place where the Emperor could simply be what he had always claimed, humanity's shepherd rather than its god. Time would tell. The multiverse was patient, and he had all eternity to discover the answer. London continued its recovery, unaware that it had served as proving ground for questions that transcended dimensions. Alucard brooded in his chambers, contemplating the possibility of redemption. Saras Victoria lived her reclaimed human life with joy that made the Emperor's sacrifice of power worthwhile. And somewhere, in the ruins of Millennium's former headquarters, the Doctor's notes remained hidden, containing secrets that would eventually draw the Emperor back for another confrontation with this universe's darkness. But that was a story for another time. For now, peace reigned. Fragile, temporary, hard-won peace. And in a universe where vampires hunted and monsters prowled, where faith had genuine power and the dead refused to stay buried, peace, however brief, was the greatest victory humanity could claim.